tell, do you see the road? I'm out to my soul into the size. Whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect, you do it. All of that green together, the truth, yeah. And I tell you the
And welcome back to Cypherfics, guys. We are happy to have you back with us today in part 4 of What If Harry Potter Meets the Power Rangers. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, and also press the bell icon so that you never miss a great update. Also, make sure to check out the wonderful author 10star12 on fanfiction.net. Well, let's continue with the story now.
Things went pear-shaped almost immediately. The instant the glow of the orb's teleportation spell faded, Harry found himself face to face with a putty patroller standing in the open doorway to the small observation room he had followed Golder into earlier. While the clay man couldn't see Harry himself, he had seen the flash of light he arrived in thanks to the teleportation orb. This was a problem. Thinking quickly, Harry dropped the orb and stepped forward, grabbing the oblivious putty's shoulder. Before the golem could react to Harry's touch, Harry jerked it into the room, snapping off a quick stunner from his wand once it was no longer standing in the doorway and sliding out of the room when he saw the putty collapse to the ground. His first escape crisis averted, Harry glanced down the hallway in each direction. Seeing nothing, he set off to his right, doing his best to backtrack the path he had followed Golder down earlier. This was a rather simple task since it was basically a straight shot back to the balcony room he had arrived in despite the various turns the hallway took. His biggest issue came in the form of stress and fear of capture. The minute or so it took him to traverse the long hallway seemed to last 10 or more as his anticipation and paranoia caused time to drag. As he neared the end of the hallway and the doorway that was his goal, Harry heard the sound of voices coming from an opening to his right. The cackling sound of Rita's voice was easily recognized, but the comparatively gentler voice he heard after was unfamiliar. "Finster!" Rita shouted as Harry slowly approached the opening, checking his cloak swiftly to make sure he was still covered. "Are my putty patrollers ready yet?" "Nearly, oh malevolent one," the other voice, apparently Finster, answered quickly. "I must say that I have never made so fine a batch of putties despite the large rush order you requested, my queen. They shall serve their purpose admirably." Harry leaned his head into the opening to see Rita in profile facing a shorter, light blue-skinned being with an upward-pointing nose and huge ears on his overly wrinkled face. Finster, for this was the only other individual in the room, was wearing a long white robe with a pale blue smock over it. He was standing before a small table with a large magnifying lens on an arm over it, smoothly using a metal tool to manipulate a clay figure on the table before him. "Good, good," Rita nearly cooed, the wicked smile on her face clearly visible. "Once my army of putty patrollers are ready we can begin our plan for the final defeat of the Power Rangers and the conquest of Earth." Harry felt one of his eyebrows raise almost of its own accord. Was she monologuing to herself? Finster had clearly tuned her out if his happy humming as he worked was any indication. Harry's thoughts were interrupted by the voice of Babu coming from behind him. "Your evilness. Your evilness. Oh, it's terrible." Harry glanced back only to see the blue being sprinting headlong down the hallway from the direction he himself had come, a look of panic on his face. Harry's eyes widened as he realized that Babu was going to slam right into him if he didn't move, so he quickly shoved off the wall, throwing himself backward with a stumble. Unfortunately, he quickly lost his balance, stepping on the back of his cloak and falling to the ground. The result of this was that Babu managed to trip over Harry's legs, sending the alien creature sprawling to the floor of the doorway into Finster's workshop. Luckily enough, Babu's screech of panic and pain easily masked Harry's slight grunt when he landed on the floor. Rita stomped over to Babu and glowered down at him as Harry quietly scooted himself to the wall behind him. "What is it, you nincompoop? Can't you see I'm busy plotting?" Babu climbed back to his feet with a groan, idly glancing around the floor as he did so. "I could have sworn I tripped on something," he mumbled. Harry felt himself pale a bit as he gripped his wand tighter. He was not in the best position to defend himself at the moment if he was discovered. Rita growled. "Never mind that. What's the problem that had you running like an earthling?" Babu stared at her for a moment before perking up. "Oh, right. Your evilness. It's terrible." Rita growled again and whapped Babu in the head with her scepter. "I heard that already, you moron. Now tell me what happened." Harry sat frozen as Babu bowed quickly, one hand rubbing his head. "Of course, Empress. One of the palace putty guards was found unconscious in the Dark Dimension control room and Golder is unconscious in the Dark Dimension itself." A look of shock overtook Rita's face for a moment before her glare returned. "And the Red Ranger?" Babu bowed again. "Gone, your malevolence." Rita's scream of rage practically rattled the walls. How could this have happened? What does Golder have to say for himself? "We can't seem to wake him, Majesty." Harry slowly started to ease himself to a standing position. Babu and Rita were standing mere feet from him, and if anyone else came along they would discover him as easily as Babu nearly did. As if summoned by the thought, Harry heard another voice. "Empress Rita, what's going on?" Tommy was jogging up the hallway, most likely having been drawn to them by Rita's scream. Harry just cursed to himself and stood fully, pressing himself against the wall, and started easing himself past the gathering of villains. He felt a nervous sweat run down the back of his neck as he moved, tightly gripping his wand in one hand and holding the cloak closed with the other. Rita rounded on the newly arrived Tommy. "Ah, my Green Ranger. You've arrived just in time. Go with Babu and retrieve Golder from the dark dimension. I will be on the observation balcony. Bring Golder to me when you have retrieved him, and I will see what should be done regarding his failure." With a quick bow and a "Yes, my queen," from Tommy and Babu, the two figures turned and started back down the corridor while Rita turned the other direction and started walking. When she passed Harry and continued through the doorway that was his own destination, he felt his chances get that much smaller. Mustering up his Gryffindor courage and his own longing to get out of this place, Harry followed behind the sorceress as quietly as he could. He really was putting more faith than he liked in the cloak of invisibility. He was much more used to being able to mask other signs of his passage, but with Rita now closer than ever there was no way he was going to use active magic unless he absolutely had to. This was especially frustrating as his shoeless foot was starting to hurt. Cautiously, Harry made his way into the room he had initially arrived in and immediately froze. The room looked much like he remembered, with the overly large telescope and balcony bordering on a truly fantastic view of the starry sky. The one thing he hadn't recalled seeing was the large, mostly blue ball floating in the middle of that sky. Harry's mind went momentarily blank as he stepped toward the balcony edge and looked out over the barren gray plains of what he could only assume to be Earth's moon. "Bugger me," Harry whispered, wide-eyed as he stared with dumbfounded fascination at the amazing view before him. "What?" Rita snapped, easily pulling Harry's mind back to the present as he spun to face her and quickly backed away. "Who said that?" Rita loudly demanded as she slowly stepped away from her telescope where she had been standing and toward Harry's former position with her staff held in both hands and pointing forward. Harry continued backing up as Rita advanced. His level of panic induced by the revelation that he wasn't even on Earth only grew as she stalked forward. Luckily enough, the sound of loud footsteps coming from the hallway caught Rita's attention. "Empress Rita!" Tommy near shouted as he sprinted into the room. "Is something wrong?" Tommy was glancing around warily, searching for whatever had set off the sorceress, even as a group of putties carried in the unconscious form of Golder. Rita quickly spun to face the newcomers. "Nothing, I just thought I heard something," she cleared her throat before stomping her way back to her telescope and rounding on them again. "Now, bring Golder forward so I can examine him myself." As the putties moved to obey, Harry let himself relax a bit. It seemed his immediate issue was dealt with, but he still had no idea how he was going to get back to the command center. His initial plan of making short apparition jumps was pretty much thrown out at this point. No matter how magically powerful he was, Harry seriously doubted his ability to apparate the distance between the moon and the Earth safely. Rita's sudden cry of triumph followed by a pulse of magic caught Harry's attention several moments later. His attention was further drawn out of his frantic planning when he heard Golder let out a groan. Rita must have brought him out of the stunner-induced coma, which meant his presence was probably not going to remain secret for much longer. "So Golder, what do you have to say for yourself?" Rita's rough voice spoke in a falsely calm tone. "Ugh, Empress?" Golder seemed dazed as he lay on the floor, struggling to regain enough control of his limbs to climb to his feet. What happened to me?" Rita's eyes narrowed a bit, causing the putties and Tommy to take a few discreet steps back. "Where is the Red Ranger, Golder? Why is it that you were found taking a nap in the dark dimension instead of destroying the Red Ranger like you were ordered to?" Finally standing once more, Golder placed one hand on his head as he stared blankly into space. I don't know, Empress. I remember toying with the Red Ranger. I remember pinning him to the floor and getting ready to kill him, and then there was someone else there, the Mageling. Majesty, the Mageling is in the palace." Harry cursed silently as Rita recoiled slightly at the strength in Golder's voice before her eyes widened and she turned toward Harry's earlier location again. Without another word, Rita lifted her staff before slamming the bottom end down on the floor, letting out a pulse of magic and a burst of wind that washed over Harry violently a moment later. It was only when he noticed every eye in the room trained on him that he realized that the wind had blown the cloak off his shoulders and the hood off his head, leaving him quite visible. Harry's brain froze as he stood before a group of individuals who would happily eviscerate him on a moment's notice. "Hi." Rita's face slowly stretched into a smile as she stepped toward him, putting herself ahead of her servants before addressing him. "So Mageling, I see you managed to infiltrate my palace. At this point Harry was practically praying that Billy would lock onto his communicator signal soon and teleport him out, but he knew that the more time he could buy the better his chances of escape. Wasn't too hard to tell the truth. I just hitched a ride with Tommy over there. He never even knew that I came along. Rita shot a quick glare at Tommy, who recoiled slightly before she turned back to Harry. Perhaps, but I did know. I felt your presence in my spell. If you tell me how you managed to avoid detection for so long and how you helped the Red Ranger escape, then you'll live longer. Forcing himself to relax, Harry leaned against the balcony railing. Oh please. You and I know that my fate isn't going to change just because I spill a few of my secrets to you. I've been through this whole dog and pony show before, so you can't fool me with your pretty words and false promises. Is that so? Rita hummed for a moment. In that case I'll just have my soldiers kill you now. Almost casually, Rita waved her free hand and the 5 putties that had brought Golder in charged him. His eyes narrowing, Harry shifted back to a full standing position. Waving his wand in a long, sweeping motion as he did so, he cast a wide area banisher at the approaching putties, sending them all crashing back into the wall behind them. Rita paused for a moment before speaking again. Your magic is so different to any I have ever seen before. Perhaps not as powerful as my own, but more versatile. Why don't you join me? With you fighting for me, we can easily defeat the Power Rangers and conquer the Earth. Harry slowly backed up until he felt a solid wall at his back. Satisfied at having prevented anyone from getting behind him, Harry spoke again. Right, like I haven't heard that line before either. Besides that, you have 3 things working against you. First, I'm not exactly on the best of terms with your main general or newest enforcer there, so that wouldn't work out too well for me. Second, you stole my wand when we first met, so that's another black mark against you. And third, you're evil, and I was practically raised with the sole intention of defeating another being of almost pure evil, so I'm already predisposed to fight against you in the first place. Sorry, but no dice. Rita growled before taking her staff in a 2-handed grip and pointing the top toward him, prompting Harry to throw up a Protego shield. Rita smirked at his action. Very well then. If you won't tell me your secrets or join me, then you'll just die right here and now. With a scream of fury, Rita unleashed a bolt of lightning from the red crystal on her staff that raked over the surface of his shield. Harry was vaguely reminded of his arrival in this dimension where she had done something rather similar. The differences now were that he wasn't quite as underfed and exhausted from his time in a ministry prison, and he hadn't been caught entirely off guard by a sudden and unexpected attack. As such, Harry was able to maintain his Protego shield under the onslaught wandlessly and still manage a blasting curse from his wand. Golder easily stepped forward and swung his sword, deflecting the spell away from Rita and out into the emptiness of space, but this also forced Rita to stop her own attack. Harry glared lightly at his opponents, keeping a specific watch on Rita, Golder, and Tommy, but doing what he could to keep track of the now recovered putties as well. It seems you are not quite as helpless as you had been when we first met, Maggling. Rita taunted in her faux-calm voice once more. However, you must realize that there is no escape for you now. Harry's response was cut off by the familiar and ever-so-welcome 6-tone beep coming from his communicator. On the contrary, Rita, Harry said with a smirk as he brought his left arm up and activated it. I think that now is as good a time as any for me to make my escape. Copy, Harry. Teleporting now. The voice from the communicator apparently caught Rita off guard, but it was nothing compared to the look on her face and the scream she let out as Harry was engulfed in a beam of white light and vanished from the balcony observatory of her palace. Harry landed in the command center and almost immediately fell to his knees. Unlike Rita's teleportation spell that had originally taken him there, his most recent teleportation had left him feeling most of the effects of the travel. While he was thankfully spared the heat and vast pressure of a true atmospheric re-entry, his entire body was still left aching from the strain of the entire process. He almost immediately felt 2 pairs of hands grab him, one set around each arm, and half carry him to a somewhat familiar cot. He blinked his eyes back into focus enough to recognize Zack and Trini had been the ones to help him just as Alpha came up and started waving a device of some sort over his body. Moments later, Alpha spoke. You seem to be all right for the most part. Just a bit of strain on your body from such a long teleportation. The pain you are feeling should fade shortly. The robot turned to walk away before pausing halfway through and facing him again. By the way, I hope you enjoy the bed you're in. I couldn't seem to locate our first one, so I had to obtain another. Harry felt a momentary twinge of guilt when he realized that Alpha was talking about the cot he had purloined for his own use that was sitting in his room under disillusionment and notice-me-not charms, but quickly decided to apologize later. For the moment he had a more important topic to bring up. Could any of you tell me why nobody saw fit to tell me that Rita's palace is located on the Bloody Moon? He was just toying with me the entire time, Jason said with a sigh. He was leaning up against one of the consoles in the command center as he told the tale of his capture while Harry waved his wand idly over the various cuts and bruises the Red Ranger was littered with. Golder would show up, taunt me for a while, throw me around, and then leave. I fought back as best I could, but without my morpher. He was engaging in psychological warfare, Jason, Harry commented idly. He was making you feel helpless in an attempt to break your spirit. Based on Rita's intention to kill you in the end and his own comments when I was following him, he was probably doing it for his own sick pleasure. Harry hummed thoughtfully before nodding. All right, hold still, this will probably sting a bit. Jason gave a wary nod as Harry stepped back. With a dramatic wave and a few mumbled words, a bright flash of light emanated from Harry's wand. The wizard seemed to slump slightly even as Jason gave a short cry of shock as he jumped from his spot. What the hell was that? He demanded. Harry gave him an even look. That was healing magic. If you'll notice, all your cuts are healed and the bruises and such are greatly faded. Jason quickly glanced over his arms and threw a few tears in his shirt before looking back up. But why did it hurt so much? Harry rolled his eyes with a shrug while a few of the other rangers snickered. Healing magic probably isn't this wand's forte. Its unstable nature would actually do quite a bit to ensure that. Anyway, quit being such a baby. Jason shot Harry a quick glare before turning away, prompting yet another eye roll from Harry followed by a yawn. Well, he started, unless anyone else needs me for something, I think I need to get some sleep. It's been a long, long day. Trini blinked at Harry for a moment before turning to Alpha. What time is it anyway? She had a note of unease in her voice. The robot glanced up from the console he was working on, making the final repairs needed to get the command center back in working order. The current time is 9:46 p.m. Harry could almost see the color drain from Trini's face. Oh man, she said with a hint of panic in her voice. My parents are gonna kill me. Kimberly was equally pale. Yeah, you're not kidding. Zach, looking equally uncomfortable, glanced between the two girls before meeting Jason's gaze. I guess we're going back to Angel Grove then? Billy and Jason nodded before the Blue Ranger spoke. That would seem to be the situation. Zach nodded before turning to Harry. Do you need a lift too, Harry? We're gonna have to take the rad bug back to Billy's place and I get the feeling the girls will be teleporting back so there'll be room for you. No thanks, Zach. I'll just apparate myself back. Thanks for the offer though. I'll see you all tomorrow, I'm sure. With a nod to the others and various goodnights, Harry twisted in place and apparat the short distance into his room, keeping the pop as quiet as possible to avoid detection when he appeared behind his closed door. Without another thought, he turned and collapsed onto his cot in the corner without even removing the spells keeping the cot hidden. He had drastically underestimated how tired he was as sleep took him almost immediately. Harry awoke somewhat late on Wednesday morning feeling quite refreshed despite sleeping in his day clothes and with the cloak of invisibility apparently having been used as a blanket during the night. With a stretch and a yawn, he ate a quick breakfast, idly noticing that he needed to go shopping at some point as his personal supply of largely non-perishable breakfast-type foods was dwindling, before heading out to the main room of the command center. Harry quickly found himself the center of attention as the 5 Power Rangers all turned toward him in their suits with their helmets held under an arm. The few slight scorch marks on a few of them led Harry to believe that they had just returned from a battle. Harry started. So what did I miss? Where were you? Jason demanded, his eyes narrowing slightly. We got called to a battle earlier and we couldn't get a hold of you. We even looked in your little workshop there, but you weren't here. How did you get in there without us noticing you anyway? Harry raised an eyebrow as he thought quickly. They probably hadn't seen him because of the notice-me-not charms on the cot he was sleeping on and he wouldn't have woken up from the communicator if he was sleeping deeply enough. With a shrug, Harry spoke. My guess is that I was sleeping when you tried to call me and the communicator didn't wake me up. I used a lot of magic in a relatively short amount of time yesterday between battling the Green Ranger, rescuing you and escaping Rita's palace with all that entailed, and then healing you back here. My body had to make up for it. As for how I got in there, it's a familiar place that shouldn't have anyone else in there, so I used it as a safe apparition point. Believe me, you don't want to know what could happen if I popped into a space someone else was standing in. It's not really a pretty picture. Harry noticed with a certain amount of satisfaction that the heat in Jason's eyes had died down with his explanation and slight deflection, so he turned his attention to the rest of the group. Billy, Trini, and Zach looked rather tired, but Kimberly looked angry. With her hair looking mussed up from sleep, Harry's best guess was that she had been pulled out of bed herself to fight against whatever creature Rita sent against them. So, can I assume things went well? Jason nodded solemnly. Well enough, yeah. It was some chick named Scorpina. Alpha said she is another of Rita's old generals, like Golder. When we got there, she called in some putties but teleported out before we really got into the fight. It was weird. Zach picked up as soon as Jason trailed off. Yeah, I mean, why would Rita send her down if she was just gonna leave right away? It doesn't make any sense at all. Trini suddenly got a thoughtful look on her face. What if this is all part of Rita's plan? The last few battles have been rather short, almost abortive. The Green Ranger left after Harry showed up, though that could have been because he was getting beaten so handily. She shot Harry a quick smile before continuing. Then when she had Jason captured and he attacked, it happened again. They didn't really push too much even after Golder arrived. Billy stepped up. And now we have Scorpina, who really didn't even try to fight us for long. It's almost as if she's trying to get us paranoid or something. Kimberly, who had been running her free hand through her hair with a frown on her face, looked up. You think she could be holding back? Trying to wear us out with all the running around because she's got something bigger planned? Jason nodded slowly as his mind caught up with the others. It's definitely possible. Harry just watched, satisfied to let the Ranger's harmless paranoia run its course. He knew that sometimes there was no conspiracy and things just happened the way they happened just because that's how the cards fell. Trini's thought on Harry's first battle with his wand were probably right. He had Green on the ropes and Rita barely pulled him out before he got blasted. Then, in their next encounter, Zach's timely calling of his Dinozord was probably what drove Golder and Tommy away, though it was likely based on what he had overheard in Rita's palace that Golder was only there to save Tommy from Harry in the first place. And to address the most recent battle, it was entirely possible that there was something else behind Scorpina's sudden retreat that they weren't privy to. Harry's was snapped out of his thoughts when he noticed Trini looking toward him oddly, her eyes trailing over his figure with a concerned look. It only took him a moment to realize that he was still wearing his sleep-ruffled clothes, so he waved his hand over his front, magically cleaning himself and straightening his clothes. He almost chuckled at the slight ruffle he felt when the spell tried and failed to straighten his hair. Some things were beyond even the ability of magic to fix. Harry shot a shy smile at Trini, who blushed when she realized he had noticed her staring before he walked over to Alpha. Good morning, Alpha. How are things going on the repair front? The robot turned to regard Harry for a moment before responding. Good morning to you as well, Harry. Though I feel good afternoon is more appropriate as it is currently 12:34 p.m. The repairs on the control consoles were largely finished yesterday by Billy and Trini, and I completed the last of it during the night. I am just finishing up some final diagnostics now. Harry glanced over his shoulder at a bright flash of light as the Rangers demorphed back to their civilian clothes before turning back to the robot. So once these diagnostics are done, are you going to start searching for Zordon again? Harry noticed footsteps as the Rangers moved closer to better overhead their conversation as Alpha continued. Yes. With the primary generator back online and full functionality restored to the controls, I calculate a much higher chance of success at locating Zordon once more. Well, that's good news at least, Zach said with a frown, apparently still worried by their collective conspiracy theory. Kimberly shifted back and forth on her feet, clearly uncomfortable as she ran one hand through her tangled hair again while using her other to maneuver a compact mirror to try and see if she was making any progress on it. So, is there really any reason for us to stick around here still? I mean, if there's not an attack or anything. Jason paused in thought for a bit before grunting. We should probably stay here for now. With Scorpina in the picture now on top of Golder and the Green Ranger, and with how busy Rita has been lately, we can't let our guard down. Besides, Billy piped up, it would be rather erroneous for you to arrive at home or elsewhere when we're all supposed to be in class right now. Kimberly seemed to slump for a moment. Right, I forgot about that. Seeing the normally perky girl bummed out as she continued to try and fix her hair with the tiny mirror, Harry took a step toward her and held out his hand. May I see your mirror, Kimberly? The Pink Ranger shot Harry a strange look. Sure, I guess. Harry took the small mirror and glanced over it for a second before casting a quick enlargement charm before levitating the now 2-foot mirror to float in front of Kimberly. With another thoughtful hum, Harry whipped out his wand and conjured a simple hairbrush before handing it to her. The brush and the charms on the mirror will only last for around an hour, so try and be done before then, yeah. Kimberly stared at him with wide-eyed amazement before her face lit up with a bright smile. And because you're a lifesaver, I won't even hold that dig against you. Thanks so much, Harry. Cheers. Harry responded with a wave before turning back to watch Alpha work. The still seemingly randomly pressed buttons may have been boring, but Harry would have felt like too much of a creep if he had watched Kimberly fix her appearance and there was really nothing else to do in the command center at present. Kimberly managed to fix her hair in half her available time, leaving Trini to take over the floating mirror to do some maintenance of her own. Then Zach took a quick peek at his appearance, but all he ended up doing was winking at his own reflection, drawing a quiet chuckle from those who saw, before returning to a quiet conversation with Jason and Billy. Other than that, nothing really happened for an hour after Harry woke. Alpha was largely silent unless asked a question, though he got rather irritated at constant requests for updates on his progress after the first few times. The diagnostics were finished rather quickly and everyone was eager to re-establish contact with Zordon. Harry was idly reflecting on how much waiting in the command center he had done of late when the alarms started going off. Ai. Alpha immediately started panicking. Rangers, look at the viewing globe. Harry and the others turned almost as one as the globe lit up, showing the tall buildings of downtown Angel Grove. It was a rather unremarkable picture until the giant form of Golder stomped into view and started firing off blasts of energy from his eyes into the structures and streets around him. Well, Harry commented. That's certainly not good. It's Golder. Jason near shouted, his anger from his treatment during captivity showing as he glared at the image. Man, he's going off the deep end. Zach's voice was thick with apprehension as they watched Golder making his assault on the city, gouts of fire now sprouting from the highest windows of several buildings. We have to stop him. Trini spoke next, saying what they were all thinking. All except Billy. It could be a trap though. The Blue Ranger was looking thoughtful as he watched the image. Harry rolled his eyes at the paranoia Billy was showing. He was about to comment when Jason beat him to it. Jason nodded with a sigh. It could be, but do we really have a choice? He's wrecking the city and it's our job to stop him. Harry relaxed again as the teens firmed their resolve. Once more, Jason had proven why he had been made the leader of their team. With a glance at the others, Jason shifted to a wider stance and reached for his morpher. You ready, guys? It's morphin' time. As one, the team lifted their morphers and prepared to call on their powers but were completely unprepared for the shower of sparks that emitted from each of the devices. The lights in the command center flickered briefly as the teens each let out cries of shock, Kimberly even dropping her morpher in the process. Harry jerked in surprise. He had been ready for a blinding flash of light followed by spandex bodysuits, but this was unexpected. What's going on? Kimberly asked, nervous now. Alpha, Billy was the first to turn to the robot for an explanation. What happened? Why couldn't we morph? Harry and the others watched as Alpha started pressing the buttons before him even more frantically than before. I'm getting a reading, he started before trailing off and pressing more buttons. After several more seconds with no further comments, Jason spoke up. Well? What is it? Alpha didn't respond for another few seconds before he jerked upright and away from the console. Ai. This doesn't make any sense. There's some kind of energy anomaly interfering with the command center's connection to the morphing grid. As long as it's there, you can't morph. There was a collective cry of, "What?" from the assembled teens. Even Harry got in on it. Harry knew that he was the only one who wasn't currently dependent on the morphing grid for power, but even he wouldn't jump at facing off against a giant monster, much less Golder, on his own. Without being able to morph, there was nothing any of them could do. Billy moved on first, his scientific mind working frantically. But what could have caused the anomaly? Could it be Rita? Trini asked, making everyone go wide-eyed. If the sorceress had found a way to block their morphing on top of everything else going on, the war was all but lost. Alpha quickly put those thoughts to rest though. No, it's not Rita. Her powers are based in the morphing grid as well, and well, suffice to say that she couldn't cut us off without doing the same to herself, which would mean a normal-sized Golder. It is possible that it was caused by the energy beam I'm using to try and locate Zordon. I had to channel it through the periphery of the morphing grid to gain access to the dimensional gap where he should be, and that could theoretically create such an anomaly. So there's nothing you can do? Jason nearly demanded, desperation in his voice. We can't morph or anything? No, I'm sorry, Alpha responded, still frantically working the controls. I am cutting power to the energy beam now, but all we can do is wait for the anomaly to fade. It could be even more hazardous if I try to do anything to speed up the process. How hazardous are we talking here? Zach asked. Because we have a rather hazardous situation going on in Angel Grove right now as it is. Alpha paused in his frantic work and turned to Zach. If we were to accidentally destabilize the energy anomaly, it could cause a massive energy surge that would bleed over through the morphing grid and into this dimension. The resulting pulse could quite easily wipe out all life in this quadrant of the galaxy. The silence that followed was absolute as the Rangers exchanged panicked glances. Zach squeaked his response several seconds later. Right, he cleared his throat awkwardly before continuing. So how long will we have to wait? Alpha turned back to the computer. I really can't say for sure. It is possible that it could break down in a few minutes, but it could take longer. Maybe even several days longer. Days! Jason shouted in horror. But Alpha continued on as if he hadn't even registered Jason's interruption. Based on the readings from this particular anomaly, I would estimate that it should be gone in slightly less than 1 hour. So I guess we have to wait then? Trini said, idly hugging herself as she did. Jason just stomped back over to the viewing globe and stared at the image playing there. With a sigh, Harry exchanged glances with the others before joining him. Before long, the 16s were watching with morbid attentiveness as Golder continued blasting the various buildings in downtown Angel Grove, helpless to intervene. 45 minutes later, Harry was getting confused. The Rangers had stopped watching the viewing globe rather quickly, probably finding themselves unwilling or unable to keep watching their hometown being destroyed as it was. They had all wandered off, Billy watching Alpha work, Kimberly and Trini talking quietly off to one side, and Jason and Zach behind one of the console sections doing some slow sparring to pass the time. Harry was still watching the viewing globe. Something about what he was seeing wasn't meshing well for him. Finally, it hit him. "Guys," he shouted, immediately drawing the Rangers' attention. "Come check this out." The teens moved quickly to gather around him as he gestured to the globe. "Are you all seeing what I'm seeing here?" There was silence for a few seconds before Kimberly answered him. "All I'm seeing is Golder still destroying Angel Grove." "Exactly," Harry said, snapping his fingers as he did. "He's still destroying Angel Grove. I'm assuming that this is a live view of everything, right?" At Billy's nod he continued. "So how is it that he hasn't leveled the whole city by now? In fact, I don't think I've seen him knock down more than one building so far. He keeps using those eye lasers of his, and the worst those have done is set a few fires that burn themselves out pretty quickly." Hey, Zach seemed to be catching on. "You're right, that is all he's doing. We all know that Golder is more than powerful enough to have trashed everything and left by now. And look at that building he just blasted," Trini piped up. "All it did was leave a few scorch marks and let off a bunch of sparks. It's kinda hard to tell with the distant view we have, but it doesn't look like more than superficial damage." "Do you think he could be exhausting himself?" Billy asked, once more in a thinking pose as he watched. Jason shook his head. "No, Harry has a point. If he had worn himself out by now, he still would have destroyed a few more buildings at the start of his attack. You know, I have to admit that I had my doubts when you guys suggested the idea earlier, but I get the feeling that this attack is the beginning of a setup," Harry said with a grim smile. "You mean it's a trap?" Kimberly asked, looking confused before nodding as she watched Golder almost carefully step around a building before launching another laser attack that didn't do much. "I get it. They were hoping that we would rush out there right away so they could ambush us or something." Harry's smile turned to an equally grim chuckle. "I bet Rita's pretty steamed right now since none of us took the time to attend her party." Jason, it seemed, failed to find any humor in the situation. "The only thing this means is that Golder didn't destroy Angel Grove even while we were unable to stop him. As soon as we can morph again, we're still going to have to go out there and put a stop to this." Harry's smile faltered for a moment, but he soldiered on. "I agree completely, Jason. But at least this way we will have a bit of surprise on our side instead of the other way around." "So we could ambush the ambushers, you think?" Kimberly asked, hope creeping back into her voice. Trini was the first to answer. "Probably not, Kim. We don't necessarily know that there is an ambush in the first place. And even if there is one, we don't really know where it would be coming from. Jason is right, this just means that Golder has been holding back. But it does suggest that Rita is pushing for a specific reaction from us," Billy said thoughtfully. "It's clear that she is trying to draw us out if nothing else." Their discussion was interrupted by a series of beeps from the computer followed by Alpha's voice. "Rangers, the anomaly has vanished. You should be able to morph now. Hurry. You heard him, Rangers, let's do this." Jason shifted his stance again as Harry stepped away. "It's morphin' time." Again, Harry mumbled with a small smile as the Rangers lifted their morphers once more. Mastodon. Pterodactyl. Triceratops. Saber-toothed tiger. Tyrannosaurus. When the light appeared as expected, Harry whipped out his wand and conjured a plain black cloak and hood before summoning the cloak of invisibility from his room. He slipped the cloak over his shoulders before covering it and himself in the plain one. The end result was rather warm, but Harry didn't feel that invisibility would work very well for him from the start this time. Fighting invisible was an issue if your allies didn't know where you were, so it was better to save it for times when you were on your own so as to avoid friendly fire. All the same, the familiar silky presence of the cloak brought him a measure of peace even as he prepared to once more charge into battle. Turning back to the Rangers, Harry gave them a small smile and a nod. "Ready when you are, guys." Jason nodded. "All right, Rangers, let's do this. Alpha, you keep looking for Zordon while we take care of Golder. Zack jumped in with a comment of his own. And please try to avoid creating any more energy whatsits while you do. I will. Good luck, Rangers. Teleporting now. The other 4 gave various affirmatives as Alpha teleported the 6 out of the command center and into the heart of downtown Angel Grove. The first thing Harry noticed when the light of teleportation faded to reveal a harbor was the lack of people. This was, of course, expected since there had been a giant armored monkey monster terrorizing the city for nearly an hour now. The second thing he noticed was the apparent lack of the aforementioned giant armored monkey monster. There weren't even any telltale sounds of explosions or shaking of the ground as he moved. Okay, where the heck is Golder? Kimberly asked. I don't know, Jason responded, turning this way and that as he searched. He's gotta be around here somewhere. Jason led the group as the 6 jogged down the pier they had teleported onto and toward the city proper. Their current location was on the bay Angel Grove had been built around. It was a mere 2 or 3 blocks from the outermost edge of what one could call downtown Angel Grove and probably near the minimum safe distance Alpha could have teleported them to. But even from this distance, none of them could catch sight of Golder. There was, however, a moderate haze of smoke coming from amongst the buildings that told them they were at least in the right area. Their search was cut off rather quickly as they rounded the corner of a warehouse only to skid to a stop when they caught sight of a large group of putties, accompanied by Squat and Babu, standing near a slender woman who was glaring at the newly arrived Rangers and Harry. She was wearing a skin-tight outfit that left her right arm bare while her left arm, left leg, and both feet were covered in heavy golden armor along with what looked like an armored bikini top. She was wearing a golden helmet with a spike coming down the right side of her face, framing her surprisingly attractive visage. Harry couldn't help but voice this last thought. DMN, she's actually kinda hot, you know, for one of Rita's servants. Harry could almost feel the looks he was getting from the Rangers. He could especially recognize those coming from Kimberly and Trini as their glares raked across his skin, somehow feeling hotter than the others. Harry just shifted uneasily before brandishing his wand. Alright, shutting up now. The woman just laughed as the Rangers drew their blade blasters. Greetings, power geeks. You're not going to get away from us this time, Scorpina. Jason shouted, giving Harry the Asian-looking woman's name. And also, power geeks? Harry shook his head ruefully. If there was one thing to be said about this dimension over his original, it was that the banter and insults were probably a bit less pathetic back home. The pre-battle banter, such as it was, continued on despite Harry's lack of attention. Oh, I think you'll find this encounter to be much different than our last, Red Ranger. You may have kept us waiting longer than we thought, but the result will be the same nonetheless. With a wicked screech of laughter, Scorpina reached behind her back and pulled out a long, curved, boomerang-like blade before pointing it toward Harry and the Rangers. Putty patrollers, attack. And so the battle was joined. As the Rangers and Putties charged each other and began their battle, Harry and Scorpina stood behind, staring across at one another. Harry himself was staying back because he knew there wasn't much he could do against the Putties up close. His initial plan was to stay back and take a few pot shots at targets of opportunity, but with Scorpina staying out of the melee as she was, that wasn't really an option. Just as he finished his thought, he saw a quick flash of movement as Scorpina brought her armored feet together before leaping into the air, her crescent blade extended before her as she flew toward the stunned wizard. At the last moment, Harry whipped his wand up. Reducto! The curse rocketed from his wand and slammed into the chest of the surprised Scorpina, sending off a shower of sparks and negating her momentum. Flailing slightly, she fell from the air and landed harshly on her back a mere 10 feet away from Harry, between him and the Ranger's battle with the Putties. Snapping off a quick incarcerus and wrapping the downed woman up in the conjured ropes, Harry backed up slowly with his wand still trained on her struggling form. So, Maggling. Scorpina practically purred from her position on the ground. I see Golder was right about you. You do indeed have a rather strange and powerful brand of magic at your disposal. So different from Empress Rita's, yet formidable in its own right. Harry raised an eyebrow. Thanks, I guess. Yes, quite formidable magic, but it doesn't help if the magic user is as stupid as you are. As Scorpina spoke, she shifted her arm slightly, bringing the razor's edge of her weapon into contact with the ropes around her and slicing them cleanly. Cursing himself for his inattentiveness, Harry whipped his wand up and began firing curses at Scorpina again, but she demonstrated a level of speed that Harry had yet to face from one of Rita's minions as she almost casually flipped to her feet and away from his spells. Harry paused in his spellcasting and watched the warrior woman. Scorpina was standing a short distance from Harry, 15 feet or so, and still between him and the Rangers' battle with the horde of Putties. A battle that the Rangers were slowly winning as far as he could see. Shifting into a dueling stance again, Harry spoke, deciding to try a new tactic. "You would do well not to underestimate me, Scorpina." The armored woman gave off a superior. "Well, I certainly haven't seen much to be impressed with, and I am one of Empress Rita's most powerful generals." Harry's eyes narrowed. Golder probably thinks the same thing, but he hasn't been able to beat me yet either. He flicked his wand slightly, deciding to go with an old standby, and transfigured and animated several arms from the concrete they were standing on. The woman seemed rather surprised for a moment before swinging her blade down once more, severing one of the arms like a hot knife through butter, only for one on her other side to grab her ankle and yank her off her feet. Scorpina's weapon slid along the ground away from her as another arm ripped it away before restraining her along with the others, leaving Rita's general lying on the ground unable to escape. "You know," Harry commented as he slowly walked toward Scorpina, staying as alert as he could for any more tricks or sudden escapes like her last one. "I probably shouldn't complain about winning most of the fights I've gotten into since arriving here, but I'm really getting sick of you people underestimating me all the time." The woman glared up at him from her position on her back, anger clearly surpassing any other emotion in her eyes, but she remained silent. After a few seconds without a response of any kind, Harry shrugged and lifted his wand again. "It's clear that you are a skilled fighter though. Perhaps a bit more speed and acrobatically inclined than Golder, as he was able to power his way out of similar restraints in the past. If you had taken me seriously, then this probably wouldn't have happened." "Oh, well. Reduct dash. Maggling." Harry's attempt at finishing off the restrained Scorpina was cut off by Golder's shout. The already giant-sized monster's voice making his head ring even as he and the Rangers looked up in time to see the armored simian stomping over, one arm reaching toward Harry and Scorpina. With only moments to spare, Harry vanished with a sharp crack, reappearing next to the regrouped Rangers who had just defeated the last of the putty patrol and were staring up at Golder as he ripped up the chunk of concrete where Scorpina was trapped. With a grunt of effort, Golder broke the main body of the concrete to pieces, freeing Scorpina, who then leapt up onto his shoulder. With a glance from the corner of his eye, Golder spoke in a surprisingly calm tone for the perpetually enraged-sounding creature. "Scorpina, return to Empress Rita's side. I shall deal with the Power Rangers and the Maggling." Scorpina said nothing, though she did send one last scathing glare toward Harry before vanishing in a flash of yellow light. His passenger now gone, Golder summoned his sword to his hand. "Now Rangers, let's settle this once and for all." With a powerful move, Golder stabbed his weapon toward his comparatively tiny opponents. Harry quickly apparat away again, but the Rangers were unable to fully escape the resulting eruption of concrete as the surface easily ruptured under the force. Protected by their suits, the Rangers were able to regroup quickly, and Harry appeared by their sides again with a crack in time to hear Billy speak. "Jason, I suggest we try a new tactic." "Right," Jason responded, clenching his fist dramatically before him. Harry just stared at them blankly. "I have an idea. How about you call your Zords and fight him that way?" The Rangers froze, looking toward Harry as if they were confused before Jason nodded. "All right guys, let's do it." The five shifted their stances as one, feet shoulder-width apart, their left hands tucked down by their waists and their right arms extended into the air with their hands spread out. "We need Dinozord Padash." Jason's triumphant shout, and consequently the summoning of their Zords, was cut off as Golder attacked them again, his foot coming down right next to them as the Rangers and Harry dove out of the way. Harry rose slowly, feeling somewhat battered after the shockwave from Golder's stomp threw him an extra dozen feet and scraped him up a bit. Once again, the Ranger suits protected them enough to allow them to recover faster, and they regrouped around Harry while Billy helped him up. "It's no good, man," Zack spoke up. "Every time we try to call the Zords, Golder is just gonna hit us again." "Well, we have to do something," Jason near shouted again. Harry had certainly noticed that the Red Ranger seemed to talk much louder while he was morphed than normally, though he hadn't yet figured out if it was another consequence of the morphing grid or just a quirk of the Ranger himself. Their sort of planning was cut short as Golder once more stomped in their general vicinity. Once they had regrouped in a location out of his sight, the Ranger suits looking a bit scorched from the latest close call, Kimberly spoke first. "We can't keep this up much longer before he flattens us. I don't suppose it would do much good to hit him with your blade blasters, would it?" Harry mused. "Or maybe the power blaster." Billy took a thoughtful pose for a moment. "The blade blasters probably wouldn't be very effective, but the power blaster has potential." Zack was quick to add his own input. "Yeah, but I bet that the moment we try to form it, Golder will attack again, just like when we tried to call the Zords." Harry cursed internally at the ridiculous amount of time that the Rangers had to take to call out any of their bigger guns. Stupid morphing grid and its stupid limitations and requirements. What if we split up? Trini suggested after another moment. If we move around more then he won't be able to keep all of us from summoning our Zords, and once we get a few of them out it will be easier to distract him long enough for the others to get called. Jason was the detractor this time. It's no good. Golder is too powerful for any one of our Zords to hold him back for long. And if he's able to take one of them out of the fight on its own we'd be in even deeper trouble. Then Harry had an idea. What if I apparate to the top of one of the buildings and start cursing him from there? I know a few spells that should be able to distract him enough for him to lose track of you guys long enough to call your Zords. The Rangers exchanged a few quick glances before Jason nodded. Alright, if you think it'll work then give it a shot. But be careful, Harry, Trini insisted. If things get bad up there don't hesitate to fall back. We can figure something else out. Harry nodded to her in acknowledgement. Not a problem, Trini. If worst comes to worst I'll just pop over to another building. He can't track my apparition so that should work. Just make sure you get your Zords as quickly as you can. My magic probably won't be able to do much more than annoy him at that size. The Rangers nodded to him as one and Harry twisted in place, vanishing with a pop and reappearing on top of the building they had been hiding behind. With a quick glance around, Harry caught sight of Golder stomping a few blocks away with his head down, apparently searching for the Rangers as he caused more random destruction around him. With another nod to himself, Harry apparat again to a building ahead of Golder and aimed carefully before letting off a conjunctivitis curse that splashed over one side of the giant simian's face. Golder reared his head back and slapped his free hand over his left eye as he shouted his rage and pain to the world. With a small smile, Harry took aim once more, hoping to catch Golder's other eye this time. His casting was interrupted, however, when a bolt of fire exploded next to him, sending him sprawling to the ground. So, little wizard, we meet again. Harry whipped his head up to catch sight of Rita Repulsa floating a short distance away from him on some kind of flying bicycle, her staff clenched in her right hand and pointed toward him as she pedaled. He climbed to his feet, checking himself over as he stood to make sure his robes hadn't caught fire, and glared at her. So it would seem. The silence between the two grew for several moments as they glared across the relatively short distance between them. Finally, Harry spoke again. You know, you still have something of mine. Rita's face twisted into something resembling a smile. Oh, you mean your old focus? Well, I don't really see how you need it anymore since you have another, and I have grown quite attached to it. It is quite the powerful artifact after all. Harry rolled his eyes. Yes, I'm quite aware. Oddly enough, that's part of the reason I want it back. I'm not quite sure what kind of wand lore you have around here, but where I'm from the wand chooses the wizard and that wand chose me. I'm sure you noticed that it doesn't quite work well for you. Rita's smile only grew. Oh, so the wand is sentient, is it? That would certainly explain some of the troubles I had with it initially, though none of those have applied since I fused it with my scepter. Now it only serves to amplify my own power. A power you cannot possibly hope to stand against. Without another word, Rita moved her scepter forward, the red orb lighting up before the energy seemed to flow into the mounted Elder Wand, arcing to the tip before a burst of magical lightning flew out toward Harry, forcing him to dive to the side to avoid it. Scrambling back to his feet, Harry spun around and fired off a quick reducto, but with her flying bicycle Rita was easily able to drift to one side and avoid it. Taking a moment, Harry summoned a silver shield with his wand before once more anchoring it to his offhand just in time to use it to intercept another ball of fire. Their magical exchange continued for several minutes with Harry mostly dodging Rita's spells while occasionally using his shield to block or deflect them and Rita almost casually flying out of the way of any of Harry's own attacks. Finally, both of them panting slightly, though Harry was convinced that most of Rita's lack of breath was from her near-constant cackling laughter, Rita spoke again. Just face it, you cannot possibly hope to defeat me. I am Rita Repulsa, the Empress of Evil, and you are nothing but a little pet wizard that the Power Rangers took pity on. Harry growled under his breath. You know, I am really getting sick of none of you people ever using my name. It's always, Maggling, or Little Wizard, or Pet Wizard. Is it too much to ask for a little recognition around here? Rita's wicked smile grew again. When you finally manage to do something to prove you are a threat to me I may decide to learn your name, but that sadly won't be possible. With another loud screeching cackle, Rita jabbed her staff forward and released a pulse of magic. It was only then that Harry realized that his feet were stuck, engulfed in concrete from the roof that Rita must have animated while he was having his rant. Now Harry was stuck, literally and figuratively. In a desperate attempt at survival, Harry ducked down and hid as much of himself as he could behind the shield mere moments before Rita's spell hit its mark. It only lasted a moment, but Harry would have sworn it was longer as his shield almost immediately buckled and then gave way, the spell breaking down before the sheer force Rita hit it with, causing the shield to dissolve. On the plus side, when the shield gave way, there was enough force left to knock him free of his entrapment. On the downside, Harry himself was more than a bit scorched from that same excess spell power. Rita floated slightly closer as Harry slowly pulled himself upright, clenching his wand tightly as he did so. "Just give in now, wizard, and I might make your end painless." Harry refused to respond, merely leveling his best glare at her as he tried to catch his breath. Rita gave a satisfied smile once more. "Very well then, Mageling." Once again, the dark sorceress began channeling her magic into her scepter in preparation for a magical lightning blast. Harry recognized the spell as it was one of her more frequently used attacks, next to her fireball spells. It was one thing that he had noticed about Rita's brand of magic: it destroyed things very, very well. Her brand of magic felt decidedly dark in nature, even on the monster fragments as he had once mentioned to the Rangers, but it was almost uniquely spun to destruction and death. Putting his musings aside, he moved his wand forward just as Rita unleashed her magical lightning, casting a point shield between them barely large enough to block the bolt from hitting him. Rita, seeing Harry's last resistance, merely cackled again and renewed her assault. Harry felt himself faltering almost immediately. Rita's power was indeed far greater than any he had faced before as far as pure strength went. But if he really thought about it, the magics of this dimension were very different from anything he had ever experienced before, so there was no telling how she would have matched up to the likes of Voldemort in a head-to-head contest. If Harry still had the Elder Wand, or even his old Holly and Phoenix Feather, he felt he would have been able to fight her on a much more even level, but with the unstable hodgepodge wand he knew he was outmatched. Even now Harry could feel his wand shuddering under the strain of the magic he was pouring through it to feed his shield. The wand simply wasn't suited to much other than offensive magics if he were honest, and even then it was an inefficient focus at best of times with its unstable nature. As his wand continued to shudder in his grip, Harry found himself having to focus further and further on his magic to keep the flow as smooth as possible so the wand's instability wouldn't kick in and knock his shield out. It was as he sank deeper and deeper into the magical flow, his awareness of all else dwindling, that he felt the spark of the familiar within Rita's attack where it was raking along the surface of his shield. He had already identified his own brand of magical energies as a sort of residual trace left behind in the monster pieces he had collected, but it wasn't till this moment that he really realized what it could mean for him. Rita had stolen the Elder Wand, a wand that he was the once and forever MSTR of. A wand that could not typically do anything to hurt its true MSTR. The most likely reason for Rita's spells working on him so far was because of the minimal amounts of Elder Wand magic in each of her spells. Harry came out of his light trance with a gleam of determination even as his reduced focus made his shield falter slightly. The traces of the Elder Wand's magics were incredibly faint within Rita's, but now that he knew what to look for they were as clear as day to his senses. With an almost carefree smile that would remind those in the know of James Potter or Sirius Black in one of their more Gryffindorish moments, Harry let his shield drop before thrusting the point of his wand once more and meeting the arc of Rita's lightning with it. In an instant, Harry flooded his wand with as much of his magical energies as it could hold and linked it to the traces of wand magic at the core of Rita's attack. The connection caught immediately and held strong so that when Harry jerked his wand to the side, the lightning bolt followed it, trailing after Harry's wand and being diverted around the wizard to impact behind him with a small explosion. Rita almost immediately stopped casting, her face now showing shock for the first time in the fight. Harry just smiled as his chest heaved with every heavy breath he took, reveling in the fury that overcame Rita as she stared. Finally, with a screech, Rita once more started casting at Harry, leading off with another of her lightning spells and following up with a pair of fireballs. Harry straightened as she began casting, once more catching her first spell with his wand and redirecting it to one side before almost casually doing the same to the first fireball. The second he caught on his wand, interfaced with the magic in its core briefly, and made a small pirouette, sure he looked rather stupid as he did it, before releasing the fireball to fly right back toward Rita. The look on her face was rather priceless in Harry's opinion. The sorceress was so stunned by Harry's sudden counterattack, and with her own spell at that she failed to move her bike in time to dodge. The resulting explosion was enough to knock Rita off her flying bicycle, sending both her and it falling to the rooftop a dozen feet in front of Harry. "How?" Rita demanded as she quickly pulled herself to her feet, relying heavily on her scepter to do so. "How did you deflect my spells like that?" Harry smiled as he straightened himself again, a faux casual air about him. "You know it's rather nice of you to join me here on a solid surface. I'll admit it was rather demeaning to be dueling you while you were merrily pedaling away in the air like that. Don't ignore me, Mageling," Rita screeched, releasing another bolt of magic which Harry almost casually redirected. Oh, believe me, Rita, Harry spoke, ice creeping into his voice now. I'm not. Reducto. Now it was Rita's turn to shield as Harry let loose with a barrage of offensive curses and hexes. Mixing reductos in with the occasional exploding curse, cutting curse, or knockback jinx. The sorceress stood strong throughout the onslaught with no clear sign of tiring, eventually forcing Harry to slow down himself lest he exhaust his magic and leave himself vulnerable. It seems we are at an impasse, Maggling. Rita spoke smoothly, a false smile once more on her face. You cannot break through my magical defenses and I cannot seem to hit you with any of my spells anymore either. Harry narrowed his eyes before nodding. That would seem to be a fair statement, doesn't mean that I'm willing to sit here and play nice with you though. Rita's smile just grew even wider. Oh, I wouldn't expect that from a goody-goody like you in the first place, Maggling. At this point, Harry was sure she was just calling him that out of spite and because she knew it annoyed him. But I have another advantage over you, I think. Harry took a cautious half-step back out of reflex only to inwardly curse himself when Rita's face began to look eager. Oh? And what's that? In response, Rita lifted her left hand up, heavily bedecked with oversized rings that were glowing with an internal light. I have more than one focus and can hold up my shield with one while I attack you with the other. Rita immediately put actions to her words as she moved her scepter forward and unleashed another bolt of lightning. Harry, relying on his earlier success, spun with the spell again, sending it crashing back into Rita's shield where it seemed to ground itself out and fizzle away without doing any damage. And now you are once more without options. Rita's false sympathy sickened him, but Harry had to admit that she had a point. There was nothing more he could do to her with his current resources. Any transfigurations he tried would probably just get blasted by her if she didn't blast him before he could complete them. Most of his other spells weren't nearly powerful enough to get past that shield of hers if his earlier barrage was anything to go by, and even her own redirected spells seemed mostly ineffective. Then Harry got another idea. This one based off his last duel with someone else using the Elder Wand. It was a long shot, but if it paid off it would be worth it. If not, well, he probably wouldn't be allowed to teleport away this time. Rita, ignorant of Harry's thoughts, spoke once more. It's too bad, really. If you had just decided to join me you wouldn't be facing your own destruction now. Harry gave her a long-suffering look. Has anyone in the history of existence ever gone for those corny lines? It's bad enough that I have to deal with the Rangers saying stuff like that on occasion, but you too? Honestly. The sorceress's face twisted back into anger, making Harry rethink the idea of being cheeky at a time like this. So be it. With yet another screech which seemed to be almost a calling card for her offensive spells, Rita let loose with another lightning blast. Using reflexes honed throughout his years of Quidditch training and fighting against Voldemort and his Death Eaters, Harry snapped his wand up and pointed it at Rita. Expelliarmus. The two spells met each other with a bright flash of light, temporarily blinding the two magic users. When their eyesight returned, Harry was pleased to see his gamble had paid off. Their two foci, Harry's wand and the tip of the Elder Wand protruding from the top of Rita's staff, were connected by their two spells fighting against each other between them. What is this? Rita demanded, leaning forward slightly behind her scepter even as Harry felt the pressure on his own spell increase. The wizard just smirked and redoubled his own efforts, reaching out to the Elder Wand's magic within Rita's attack and tweaking it slightly as he did. Harry's efforts began showing fruit immediately as Rita's spell began losing power, slowly shifting the junction between their spell-lock stalemate closer to the Dark Sorceress. As her spell continued to fail despite her efforts, Harry could see the panic on Rita's face grow as she placed her free hand on her scepter, consequently dropping her shield as she did so. Finally, she snapped at him. How are you doing all this? It isn't possible for you to be this powerful. Harry took a physical step forward, his proximity adding to the force behind his spell. High on his seemingly inevitable triumph, Harry spoke. You made this possible through your actions, Rita. I told you before, the wand chooses the wizard, and that wand chose me. With one last push, Harry's spell broke through Rita's and slammed into her, knocking the sorceress to the ground and wrenching her scepter from her hands. With an almost casual motion, Harry swapped his wand to his offhand and caught the scepter easily. He took a moment to examine the Elder Wand, trying to find some way to remove it, but his attention was quickly drawn to Rita's shout. Golder. The echoes of Rita's most likely magically enhanced shout had barely faded when the building shook violently and Golder's giant head rose into sight, his left eye still squinting slightly from the effects of Harry's earlier spell. You summon me, my queen? Harry was paralyzed in shock at the monster's proximity and so was unable to react even as Rita spoke. Recover my scepter and remove this annoyance. As you command, Empress. Golder's eyes lit up as he spoke and Harry instinctively cast a protego, not immediately noticing that he had channeled through Rita's scepter as he did so. The Elder Wand-enhanced shield was really all that saved his life as Golder's optic blasts destroyed the roof of the building below him and sent the wizard flying backward and off the edge of the building, losing his grip on the scepter as it clipped the building just before he went over. Harry had always enjoyed flying and the freedom of being up in the air, but he found that getting into the air by being suddenly blasted off the top of a building wasn't quite as appealing. Before he could fully descend into panic though, his fall was cut short when he felt a hard impact and a pair of arms wrapped around him in midair. Moments later, Harry once again found himself on solid ground, Trini's helmet close to his face as she lightly shook one of his shoulders. Harry, are you all right?" Harry glanced around, wide-eyed to see the other Rangers all standing nearby, their suits considerably more scorched than when last he saw them, and shooting glances at him between cautious sweeps of their surroundings. Finally turning back to Trini, Harry nodded once and placed one of his hands over hers still on his shoulder. Yeah, I think I'm all right. Hey, you know how I once complained about you guys saving me at the last second all the time? Yeah, never again. Harry let himself collapse as he felt the adrenaline drain from his system. Harry heard Zack give out a light chuckle. "Good to see you're still with us, man. What happened up there?" Harry took a few deep breaths before pulling himself to a sitting position as best he could, having to rely on Trini's help in the end when a few muscles protested his sudden movement. "Rita showed up just after I cursed Golder the first time. We dueled. I disarmed her. Then Golder showed up again and blasted me." "You fought Rita?" Kimberly exclaimed, shock coloring her voice. "And managed to disarm her? Did you manage to reacquire your original focus?" Billy asked, his voice sounding eager. Harry glanced around for a moment before shaking his head. "I'm pretty sure I lost the scepter when I got blasted off the building." He turned to Trini, feeling a bit of marauder mischief coming on due to the euphoria from his adrenaline rush. "And as soon as we are out of danger I am going to hug the heck out of you for catching me, by the way." He followed it up with a bright smile that didn't falter even as Trini jerked slightly before freezing. "Don, don't mention it," Trini nearly squeaked. Harry chuckled inwardly. He swore he could almost feel the heat of her blush even from within her helmet. "We don't have time to mess around, guys." Jason interrupted the moment, redirecting everyone's attention to him. "We need to stop Golder from destroying the city." "Yeah," Harry interjected. "Why haven't you guys called the Zords yet? What went wrong?" Jason looked down and clenched his fist in frustration. Golder just wouldn't let up. No matter where we went, any time we tried to call the Zords or form the Power Blaster, he was right on top of us and we had to scatter. It's like he knew where we were the entire time. Harry gave a thoughtful hum. "Well, since he's not on top of us right now, I would have to assume that he was somehow sensing the buildup of morphing grid energy that gets let off each time you guys try to do something big like that. And that begs the question that if he could find you so easily, why hasn't he done much of anything to you yet? Hey now, it's not like we got away unscathed each time, you know?" Zack commented, indignantly. "I'm not saying that you did," Harry retorted calmly as he stood, once again with Trini's help. "What I am saying is that your earlier trap theory that I initially doubted and then agreed with is becoming more and more likely in my mind. Some of the stories you've told me about Rita from before I got here and some of what I've experienced since have led me to believe that she is one for sometimes drawn-out and occasionally nonsensical plans, and this situation really feels like a delay tactic for a big setup to attempt to defeat you guys in a big way." While the Rangers pondered his comments, Harry took a few moments to do what he could about the minor burns and scrapes he had from his short battle with Rita. A few healing spells later, and an internal agreement with Jason's statement from the previous day about his healing magic stinging a lot more than it probably should, Harry felt well enough to continue as needed. His magical reserves were still sitting above half and his body didn't hurt too badly now that he had dealt with his most prominent injuries. What little soreness and fatigue he had accumulated so far was manageable as long as nobody expected him to run a marathon anytime soon. "I guess we'll just have to stay on guard as best we can, Rangers." Jason finally spoke up again. "The situation hasn't changed. We still need to protect the city, so let's get to it." "Right." The other four chorused while Harry merely rolled his eyes internally. That was Jason, ever the team leader/font of inspiration. Their team moment was interrupted by the familiar cackling of Rita Repulsa as she swooped down from behind Harry and pivoted to face them from atop her flying bicycle once more and with her scepter in hand. Harry was happy to note, however, that the bike looked a bit worse for wear after he had managed to blast it earlier. "So," Rita simpered in her falsely kind tone once more. She seemed to have already put her defeat at Harry's hands, temporary though it had been, behind her. "Are you stupid power geeks ready to give up?" Jason, ever the eloquent speaker, shouted their response. "Never." Jason, you are a fool, Rita drawled, her smile not leaving her face. The Red Ranger paused for only a second before firing back. You're the fool if you think we'll surrender to you. At this point Harry was musing internally on the unfairness of Rita calling Jason by name and so nearly missed Golder's surprise attack, which was surprising all on its own with the monster's size. Silence, the giant simian shouted before thrusting his sword at them. It was once again easily dodged by Harry and the Ranger, however, only building Harry's paranoia as they regrouped. You can't win, Rita. Jason's shout was promptly ignored as Rita merely started laughing again. And now it's time to complete my evil plan. The cycling sorceress looked especially gleeful as she turned to her oversized minion. Golder. Do it. Harry and the Rangers watched dumbfounded as Golder nodded to Rita before stepping back and looking around himself for a moment. Finally, with an exclamation, the armored giant reached around behind a building and came up with a bus in hand. As he stomped closer once more, Harry and the Rangers caught sight of a few figures running back and forth within the bus with their arms flailing about. No! Jason cried out, one hand stretched out dramatically. There are civilians in there. Golder merely sneered as he examined the bus closely. Yes, I know. He seemed to squint a bit before letting out a booming laugh. Actually, they're friends of yours. I believe you call them Bulk and Skull. Ah, bollocks, Harry mumbled before glancing up at where Rita was still floating, her attention on Golder as he continued to turn the bus in his oversized hands. Snapping his wand up, Harry tried to take advantage of the sorceress's lack of focus. Bombarda! Harry's sudden exclamation and the flash of light from his spell caught everyone's attention as his attack raced toward Rita only to slam into a shield several feet from her and explode harmlessly. Rita turned back toward Harry and the Rangers with a pitying expression. As if it would be that easy, maggling. Now, Golder. Take them to the beach. Golder nodded as he turned away. As you wish, Empress Rita. Jason and the other Rangers almost immediately began running after him. Come on guys, we've got to save them. Harry sighed before glancing back up and seeing Rita had vanished again. With an internal groan Harry started jogging after the Rangers, seriously missing his firebolt about now. Still, even as he ran he couldn't help but feel they were playing right into Rita's hands. In fact, she had straight up admitted to having an evil plan, so it would follow that this was all a part of it. Harry again reflected on the Gryffindor's charge-ahead mentality that he had developed over his lifetime. It really did put him in some difficult situations and getting mixed in with a bunch of Gryffindor-like heroes didn't help. But Jason had a point. They really didn't have a choice, especially with civilian innocents involved. Even if they were Bulk and Skull. And Harry got the feeling that that was exactly what Rita was shooting for. The trap was prepared and the bait identified. Now it was time to see what happened when they set it off. It didn't take more than a few blocks for the Rangers and Harry to completely lose sight of Golder. His giant size made him more easily visible but also much faster as it came with a stride that the regular-sized Rangers just couldn't match. They were eventually forced to contact Alpha, who reported a small amount of progress in his search for Zordon, so they could teleport to the shoreline that was Golder's most likely destination based on the direction he had been heading. The location was a few miles north of Angel Grove proper and was the first location along that particular stretch of coast that could really be called a beach. They quickly realized that they had teleported to the right place when they heard the familiar cackle of Rita Repulsa sound out from the top of a nearby cliff with Scorpina standing next to her. Ah, Rangers and the Maggling. What took you so long? Harry rolled his eyes at Rita's theatrics. Anybody see the bus? Kimberly was the first to respond, pointing down the beach frantically. Look over there. Harry's gaze traveled along the edge of the cliff in the direction Kimberly had indicated. He immediately noticed the cliff's height increasing the further down he looked as the beach beneath it dwindled to nothing until he got to the bus's location, around 100 yards from where they were currently standing. The bus was precariously close to the edge of the cliff and rocking ever so slightly as he watched. Beneath it was nothing more than a straight drop onto jagged rocks with waves crashing over them. Oh man! Zack shouted next. It could go over any second. We've got to save them. Jason predictably shouted. Harry chose that moment to cut across the Rangers' panicked shouting. Okay, we know where the bus is, but does anybody see Golder? The Rangers paused before glancing around again. How in the heck do you hide a 100-foot golden monkey so well? Zack joked after a few moments. Alright, so I'll go after the bus then while you guys take this chance to call the Megazord. Harry commented easily before checking to make sure his hood was up and secure. It wouldn't do for Bulk and Skull to recognize him if they managed to glance outside the bus's windows. Call the Megazord? Jason seemed confused. Harry, still feeling uneasy about the entire situation, rounded on Jason with a look of exasperation. Yes, call the Megazord. You know, that big robot that you guys used to fight the giant monsters? The one you've been trying to call since we left the command center? The one Golder was keeping you from calling? That Megazord. Call it and I'll deal with the bus and saving Bulk and Skull. But we can't. Jason's voice gained confidence as he spoke. We can't escalate a battle, I know Zack and the others told you about that. Besides, we don't need Megazord to save the bus. Harry just gave Jason a blank stare, forgetting for a moment that the obscuring charm was as effective as the Rangers' helmets at hiding his face and expressions. Yes, they did and you're right, Megazord isn't necessarily needed for that. I am more than capable of taking care of the bus with my magic, but just because we changed locations doesn't mean that the situation has changed. Giant Golder is still around here somewhere and you guys need to call the Zords so that you can hold him off if he decides to take an interest in me while I try to save the idiots trapped in the bus on the cliff. Jason seemed about to say something further, but Billy rested a hand on his shoulder, effectively cutting him off. The Red Ranger spun to see the other four staring at him. Jason, Billy said slowly. Harry has a point. He glanced at each of the other Rangers momentarily before letting out a harsh breath of air. All right, we'll go with your idea. Harry could clearly tell that Jason's attitude toward him was quickly reverting back to its original state. Apparently, saving someone's life around here left an impact that quickly faded after a single night's sleep. Their planning was once more interrupted by Rita's laughter. If you are all done having your little discussion down there, Rita turned toward the bus and waved her free hand airily. Send it over. Harry. Go. Jason bellowed before turning back to the others. All right, guys. Let's do it. Harry rolled his eyes as he twisted in place and vanished with a soft pop while the Rangers' call echoed across the area. We need Dinozord power, now. Reappearing at the top of the cliff, Harry took a moment to examine the situation. He was standing on the opposite side of the bus from where Rita and Scorpina were still staring down at the Rangers on the beach. The bus itself, a mere 30 or so feet from him, was surrounded by a dozen putties. Though that number was a guess based on the 6 he could see on his side, he had no idea how many were on the other side just now, as all he could see of them were several pairs of randomly shuffling feet and the occasional head seen through the bus windows. The putties were the reason the bus was rocking as they bounced around it, slamming into it at random intervals with their customary sound filling the air. From inside the bus, Harry heard the screams of panic and fright, one much higher pitched than the other, that could only be coming from Bulk and Skull. Unless there was a 6-year-old girl in there too, and one of the 2 bullies had passed out. Behind the bus stood Squat and Babu. The monsters were each grasping a long log with one end tucked under the bus. They were grunting and straining as they lifted the logs up, slowly but surely forcing the bus closer and closer to the edge. Harry took all this in a few seconds before taking a deep breath to center himself and whipping his wand up. His first spell was a cutting charm. The flash of light caused by his spell caught the attention of the 2 monsters and gave them enough time, if only barely, to scramble back out of the way as it flew through the space they had previously occupied. It did serve the purpose of slicing the 2 logs in half though, effectively making them useless for their previous purpose. Squat squealed in a pig-like fashion. It's the Magaling. Oh no. Babu started waving his hands frantically over his head as he panicked, the image nearly making Harry laugh from the sheer level of ridiculousness. Putty Patrol, hold him off while we push this bus over the edge. Harry narrowed his eyes as the putties on his side of the bus twisted suddenly, catching sight of him before charging him in their unique, tumbling style. Momentarily cursing himself for not operating in under the cloak of invisibility, Harry met the creature's charge with the wave banisher that had worked so well on them in the past. The magical wall of force slammed into the first wave of putties and slammed them back into the side of the bus, consequently renewing the screams coming from within. The second wave though, a group of 7 that came from the far side of the bus, managed to avoid it by simple premise of having leapt over the bus and so over the spell. With skillfully executed rolls and tumbles, the airborne putties hit the ground and came up charging, forcing Harry to backpedal even as he began flicking his wand this way and that, each movement releasing a spell to encumber or force back the encroaching horde. Any spell that he could use to take any of them out of the fight permanently would take too long to cast, leaving him vulnerable to the rest of the group. Not to mention that if the nimble soldiers managed to dodge one of his more destructive spells, it would more than likely hit the bus behind them. This was one of the biggest reasons he hated fighting putties. With a grunt of frustration, Harry twisted again, operating himself behind the full group of putties before turning quickly and jabbing his wand toward them. Bombarda Maxima. Harry's exploding charm rocketed forward and crashed into the back of the rearmost putty. The group of clay constructs were taken off guard by the sudden attack, having lost track of Harry when he operat, and were completely obscured by the dust and smoke created by the following explosion. Harry braced himself as the ground shook slightly as a result of the explosion he had caused, only to quickly glance up and look around when the shaking didn't stop after a few moments. His fears were realized when Golder's memorable face appeared over the edge of the cliff before rising up higher and higher, finally topping around 20 feet over his head as the monster glared down at him, a certain vicious eagerness in his eyes. Well, if it isn't a little maggling for me to play with. Golder threw back his head and laughed while Harry could only look on, wide-eyed. I think it's time to put an end to our little games, maggling, the giant simian taunted as he reached with one of his colossal hands to grab onto the still paralyzed Harry. I will make you pay for what you did to Scorpion AHHH. The monster was interrupted by the giant metal fist of the Megazord being planted into the side of his head. Harry was forced to duck slightly and turn away to protect himself from the massive shower of sparks only to fall to the ground when Golder caused a minor earthquake when he crashed into the comparatively shallow water at the base of the cliff. Harry felt an extreme amount of gratitude when he heard Jason's voice from his communicator. We'll keep him occupied, Harry, you just focus on saving Bulk and Skull. Yeah, no problem, Harry idly gasped as he forced himself to his feet once more, still a bit weak in the knees from his near brush with death. Once he had regained his feet, not an easy task with the two titanic combatants stomping around nearby and constantly shaking the ground as a result, Harry turned once more to the putties just in time to see two of them struggle to their feet from amongst the pieces of their former comrades. Harry only took long enough to mentally note that one of them was missing an arm and the stump looked rather similar to a shattered stone sculpture before sending two piercing hexes right into the construct's foreheads, causing them to once more collapse to the ground. With a sigh, Harry turned to face the bus once more just in time to see Squat and Babu, through the use of full body charges and a great deal of pushing, manage to get the front axle over the edge of the cliff. He could see Bulk and Skull clinging to each other within the bus, sitting right next to the doors at the front in fact, with their faces pale in fear as they screamed. Why they hadn't just opened the door and run out before the front of the bus went over the edge he didn't know, but for now Harry turned his attention to Rita's minions. All right boys, Harry said loudly, his wand trained on Squat and Babu as they froze in place. Step away from the bus and I promise I won't hurt you too bad. The pair of misfit monsters exchanged a glance before Babu spoke. We have to follow Rita's orders, Squat. You keep pushing, I'll hold him off. The blue monster merely nodded before backing off a few feet and charging once more, slamming into the bus and budging it forward another few inches. Harry idly considered hitting the bus with a sticking charm before Babu stepped forward to square off with him. You sure you want to do this? Harry asked, keeping his wand trained on his opponent. You don't really think you can stand up against me when I've beaten down Golder, Scorpina, and Rita already, do you? Babu didn't respond, choosing instead to reach behind himself and pull out a long, thin, rapier-like sword and brandish it in a mocking salute. I will not let you interfere in Empress Rita's plans anymore. With that declaration, the dark-furred being charged at Harry only to trip over his own feet after a few steps, falling flat to the ground and losing his grip on his weapon. Harry idly watched as the sword spun away across the ground before flicking his eyes back toward Babu. The monster leapt to his feet again in a heartbeat. That's fine, I didn't need that sword to defeat you anyway. He brought his right hand up to his face, holding it with his fingers spread wide so he could still keep track of Harry through the gaps as his eyes started glowing faintly. Take this. With a flourish, Babu flung his arm back down away from his face and the light in his eyes lanced forward in a destructive beam of energy. A destructive beam of energy that stretched out for about 2 feet before sputtering out, the entire attack fading away shortly after. What the Babu had a look of utter confusion on his face as he glanced back and forth between Harry and his own hand several times before bringing his hand up once more and repeating the entire process. Take this. This time, the beam faded away after a few inches, leaving Babu even more befuddled and Harry fighting to hold back his own laughter. Then he heard a loud crunch followed by a triumphant cry from Squat as the bus began sliding over the edge of the cliff, pulled by its own weight and momentum from the monster's last shove. Harry snapped back to reality with a curse as he realized he had allowed himself to be distracted from his actual goal. With an almost negligent wave of his wand, Babu, still looking confused as to why his attacks hadn't worked, was banished back into Squat, the two monsters falling to the ground in a pile of flailing limbs. Quickly facing the bus, Harry jabbed his wand forward. Arresto momentum. While the two monsters struggled to stand again, invariably knocking each other back to the ground in the process, Harry watched as the bus slowed its movement before finally stopping just as the rear tires slipped over the edge. Sweating slightly, Harry gave his wand a quick swish and flick. Wingardium Leviosa. The bus jerked in place slightly when Harry's first spell gave out in place of his levitation spell, but it still followed his wand's movement up into the air and back over solid ground while Squat and Babu just watched in wide-eyed astonishment. Straining only slightly, Harry lowered the bus back down close to the ground before cutting his spell and letting it fall the last few feet, if only to hear Bulk and Skull's reaction. With a slight smile at their startled screams, Harry turned back to Squat and Babu, who were now staring at him with fear in their eyes. Harry just smirked. Boo! And the two monsters were up like a shot and running for all they were worth. Harry almost casually waved his wand and they fell to the ground once more before being bundled up in conjured ropes, tying the two together with enough rope that they wouldn't even be able to so much as twitch a finger. Taking a moment to gather himself after nearly failing his part of the mission, Harry made his way over to the doors to the bus, idly eyeing Bulk and Skull as they stared at him through the glass doors. He just stood there for a second, seeing the petrified looks on their faces, and realized that with his long black cloak and shadowed face, he probably cut something of an intimidating figure to the two. Add that on top of them having been kidnapped by one of Rita's monsters, and it wasn't too surprising that they hadn't made any move to leave the bus yet due to their overwhelming cowardice. Rolling his eyes, Harry waved his wand and the bus doors opened, causing the two bullies to squeak in fright once more. After a moment of thought, Harry cast a charm to mask his voice, just in case, and stepped to one side, gesturing with his free arm for them to leave the bus. Whenever you gentlemen are ready. The coast is about as clear as it's going to get right now. This seemed to spark the two into action as they quickly stood and brushed themselves off in as casual a manner as they could before making their way down the short steps and out of the bus. Once they got out, Bulk turned to face him as Harry waved his wand again, closing the bus doors. So who are you anyway? Harry once again wished that someone could see his face past the obscuring charm on his hood. It just wasn't the same when people couldn't read your facial expressions to get the full impact of your comment. I'm a friend of the Power Rangers. They asked me to step in while they took care of the big guy. Big guy? Bulk asked dumbly before his eyes widened as the ground shook once more. Harry took a quick glance up to see that this time it was caused by the Megazord landing hard, apparently having taken a strong blow from Golder's sword if the slightly smoking weapon in the monster's hand was any indication. Oh, Bulk squeaked, slowly turning away from the battle and toward the disguised Harry. That big guy. Harry rolled his eyes again. Yeah, that big guy. He turned slightly before pointing down the coast in the direction of the city. Angel Grove is that way. You guys may want to get going before things get even more dangerous. Bulk and Skull exchanged a panicked look before the bigger bully drew himself up. Yeah, well, we, need to get going anyway. Have lots of things to take care of and stuff? Skull, nodding stupidly next to him, finally found his own voice. Yeah, things and stuff. After exchanging another look, Bulk turned and started walking back toward Angel Grove. So bye. Skull followed him without a word, matching Bulk's almost casual pace as they tried to save face for whatever reason they felt was important. It only took the earth shaking once more from the giant battle nearby though before they changed that seemingly casual walk into a dead sprint. Bulk was moving surprisingly fast for a person of his weight and Harry couldn't help but be impressed at how little time it took before they were out of his sight and, hopefully, out of immediate danger. With another sigh, Harry removed the vocal charm on himself and activated his communicator. Guys, it's Harry. Bulk and Skull are safe. I sent them back toward Angel Grove and I have Squat and Babu restrained here. How are things on your end? As Harry watched, Golder and the Megazord exchanged a few blows, Golder using his sword and the Megazord almost easily avoiding most of them to get close enough to land several punches. Moments later, Jason's voice echoed from his communicator. Surprisingly well, actually. I'm really starting to agree with your trap idea now, Harry. And Harry could just tell that it bugged the Red Ranger to admit that. This is just way too easy. Harry then heard a loud cackle from Rita before he felt an enormous burst of magic in the area around them. I think Rita just cast some kind of spell. I could literally feel it washing over me. What do you think it was? Kimberly asked. Harry glanced around, taking special notice that the distant figures of Rita and Scorpina were still standing in their original position, apparently having been watching the battle the entire time. It was only then that he noticed that it seemed to be getting darker. Is it just me or is it getting dark all of a sudden? It was Billy who confirmed his suspicion. Affirmative. A solar eclipse has started. That must be what Rita's spell did, Harry spoke slowly, confusion apparent in his voice. But why would she use so much magic on something like that? Most likely because she somehow knows that the Megazord is solar-powered. Billy answered quickly even as Golder landed another blow on the Megazord. Once the Rangers stabilized themselves again, Billy continued. We're already down to 75% power. The Megazord's reaction speeds are slowing. DMN it. Jason shouted. She must be trying to take out the Megazord. Harry's next comment was cut off as Rita's voice once more echoed across the area. Scorpina. Go. Harry turned in time to see one of the small figures, he assumed Scorpina, leap from the cliff and land on the beach where Harry and the Rangers had arrived. Now let's see her grow. The distant form of Rita flung her scepter down to the beach where it landed next to Scorpina, the gem flashing brightly even as the earth split open to release a gout of steam that engulfed the woman/monster as Rita's unique growth spell took effect. The monster that emerged was nothing like what Harry had expected. Based on his previous experience with Rita's monsters, Harry was just expecting a larger form of the surprisingly human-looking Scorpina. What he got when the steam dispersed was a far more monstrous creature. She had a large, wicked-looking pincer in place of her left hand and her entire body was covered in dark brown and red plates that resembled an insect's exoskeleton. Her head had turned red as well and grew a muzzle-like protrusion full of deadly-looking teeth with 2 hooked horns that came from each side of her head and ended down near the bottom of her jaw. From the back of her head, there were several long spines jutting out around a longer, thicker one that hung down and ended in a wicked scorpion-like stinger. The only real item that linked Scorpina's previous form with her current one, other than the obvious scorpion motif, was the boomerang-like sword that she still carried. "DMN, she sure isn't hot anymore," Harry mumbled before shaking himself and lifting his communicator once more. "Guys, heads up. Scorpina has just had a growth spurt and is heading your way." "Got it, Harry," came the quick reply, this time from Zack, before the channel closed again as the two monsters converged on Megazord. The fight that followed was painful for Harry to watch. Mostly because he knew there was little to nothing he could do to help. Megazord, piloted by the Rangers, did the best it could, warding off most of the blows that came its way with deft movements that greatly resembled Jason during the various spars that Harry had seen him in. But as the moon moved further and further over the sun, its movements started becoming more and more sluggish. Finally, with the sun fully hidden behind the darkness of the moon, the now monstrous Scorpina and a laughing Golder moved as one, Scorpina leading in with a flurry of strikes with her weapon and Golder following up with a flying dropkick that smashed into the Megazord's chest plate and knocked it to the ground. After waiting for a few moments for the robot to rise again, Golder and Scorpina began laughing wildly at their apparent victory. Harry activated his communicator again. "What's going on in there, guys? Our solar power cells are almost completely drained," Trini's frantic voice announced. "We can't get back up." Harry recoiled slightly. How inefficient was that thing if it went down from lack of power in less than 2 minutes if the sun wasn't shining? Shaking himself, Harry glanced down at his wand and considered his options. Firming up his resolve, Harry looked back at the giants before him. The Megazord was twitching ineffectually as it rested on its back in what was probably 20 or 30 foot deep water with its upper torso slightly propped up on some submerged rocks while Golder and Scorpina laughed and taunted the helpless Rangers. He may have had his differences with Jason, but the rest of the Rangers were his friends and there was no way Harry James Potter was going to leave his friends out to dry if there was absolutely anything he could to save them. It just wouldn't fit in with his image and saving people thing. Smiling ruefully, Harry twisted and vanished with a pop only to reappear on the chest of the Megazord. Glancing down with a smile, Harry recognized the moment that the Rangers, housed in their control room beneath him, realized where he was. His communicator activated almost immediately. "Harry," Kimberly's voice rang out this time. "What are you doing?" He just smiled at them. "Stepping in to try and give you guys a breather. And you might want to look away for a moment." Without paying them any more mind, Harry lowered his communicator and lifted his wand. Golder and Scorpina didn't seem to have noticed his presence just yet, but he was going to change that. Taking his own advice and closing his eyes as he looked away, Harry called out his first spell. Lumos Solum. He realized that his play at getting the giants' attention worked immediately as they let out twin roars of pain as the bright light emitting from his wand scorched their eyes. It was Golder who first identified him as Harry let his spell fade. "Maggling. You think to stand against us even now? We have defeated the Power Rangers. My Empress's plan worked flawlessly and there is nothing that can be done to stop us now." Harry pointed his wand at himself this time. "Sonorous. I'm afraid I just don't work that way, Golder," he said, his voice echoing just as loud as the giants, clearly shocking both monsters as it did. "It's like I told Rita back on the moon, I'm kind of predisposed to fight evil like you guys. And honestly, giving up isn't in my nature either." Golder and Scorpina exchanged a glance before the simian sent a smirk toward Harry. He assumed that Scorpina was doing something similar, but Golder's face was infinitely easier to read than hers at present. "So be it, Maggling." Golder spoke with a nod before the two stomped forward. "Don't say you weren't warned." Harry nodded and silently cancelled his voice amplification charm. For his plan, such as it was, to work, he needed them as close as possible. Harry, just get out of here. We'll be fine. Trini's voice once more came from his communicator, prompting Harry to respond. Give me some credit here, Trini. I do actually have a plan, kind of. He trailed off and winced internally as he knew that it didn't exactly inspire confidence. And that plan is? Zack prompted. Harry just shrugged and shot another uneasy smile at the Rangers through the eyes of the Megazord before looking back up toward the monsters. By this time Golder and Scorpina were standing just beyond where the Megazord's feet were obscured by the water and were lifting their swords over their heads to finish off Harry and the Rangers. Any last words, Magaling? Harry smirked. Only that is probably the worst question to ask a fully trained wizard who uses vocal spells as his primary method of casting. Knowing that Golder and Scorpina wouldn't have heard that, and slightly wishing he hadn't cancelled his sonorous, Harry settled for jabbing his wand toward the two and shouting as loud as possible, gathering up his magic and pushing as much into the spell as he possibly could. Reductio Maxima Duo. Harry's knees nearly buckled and he was almost sure he sprained his right elbow from holding it steady through the kickback from his spell leaving his wand. The bright light shot forward several feet before splitting off into two separate bolts guided by his willpower, one heading for each of the giant monsters poised to kill him and the Rangers. The instant the spells impacted into the monsters' chests, Harry felt a massive strain on himself as his magic battled with Rita's to assert Dems. Growling to himself, Harry widened his stance slightly and put his left hand over his right on his now heavily vibrating wand. With an internal heave, the man who won showed why Dolores Umbridge and her supporters had been afraid of his power as he flung the full force of the most powerful wizard of his generation behind his spell with a furious shout. He could feel the Hollywood of his wand heating up beneath his fingers as he once more strained against the physical kickback from the immense amount of magical energy flowing from his focus. He was happy to note, however, that he had overpowered Rita's spell quite handily. Harry felt a small smile stretch across his face through the strain as he watched Golder and Scorpina start to shrink. The two monsters seemed unable to move, though the panic in their eyes told him that they were certainly trying. There must have been something in the intent of Harry's spell that kept them from escaping their now inevitable fate. Less than 10 seconds later, the two monsters finally stopped shrinking. They had been losing size centered around the impact points of Harry's spell on their chests, and so it was that when his spell finally released its hold on them they were left to fall nearly 40 feet into the water below. Harry fell to his knees as his spell sputtered out, his wand giving out a short burst of sparks before going silent as well. He looked up briefly in time to see the two shrunken monsters burst through the surface of the water, struggling mightily to stay afloat despite their most likely heavy armor. He was mildly interested to notice that Scorpina was still in her scorpion monster form instead of having reverted to her more human-looking form. These were his thoughts as his body began to give out on him and he collapsed face down on Megazord's chest, his head coming to rest face down, which allowed him a wonderful view at the seemingly paralyzed Rangers within. Harry gave them a weak smile as he pulled his free hand into view and made a thumbs up. "Got you covered, guys," and then he went limp as consciousness deserted him once more. Harry woke with a groan to the familiar black ceiling and sounds of the command center. "I really have to stop doing this." His comment brought the attention of the 5 Rangers immediately to him and a short scramble ensued as they quickly made their way to his side. It was Trini who asked the question they were all thinking though. "Stop doing what, Harry?" Shooting her a self-depreciating smile, Harry sat up slowly with one hand to his head to soothe the slight headache he felt growing. "Stop doing stupid stuff that knocks me unconscious so that I end up waking up on a cot in the middle of the command center. It's getting a bit monotonous." Trini and Billy moved to help him turn on the cot, allowing him to sit facing Zordon's still empty tube before he spoke again. "So what happened after I blacked out? Is the Megazord safe?" The Rangers exchanged a few uneasy looks before Jason shook his head slowly. "Alpha teleported you here right after you passed out. And then the Green Ranger showed up, giant-sized." "Bugger," Harry mumbled, resting his face in his palms as his mind raced. "Yeah, that's about right," Zack confirmed. "We called the power sword and Billy managed to use it to recharge the power cells enough to fight him, but just when we started to get the upper hand, Rita stepped up and blasted us." Harry shot him a look when he stopped talking before sweeping his gaze around to the others. None of them looked like they were going to pick up the story. Finally, he decided more prompting was necessary. "And? What happened? Was the Megazord destroyed?" The Rangers just flinched, but it was Alpha who spoke from behind one of the consoles as he wobbled back to the center. "Not exactly, but none of the Zords can be accessed. It is clear the destroying the Zords was Rita's intention, but with your intervention that was made impossible before the eclipse would have ended, recharging the Megazord's power cells and allowing the Rangers to defeat the Green Ranger. And that still tells me nothing. Harry was starting to get a bit irritated at this point. So if the Megazord wasn't destroyed, then why is everyone so bummed out? Alpha once more answered his questions. Rita trapped the Megazord deep underground and sealed it there with powerful magic. I'm afraid that the Megazord is out of our reach for the foreseeable future. Unless something miraculous happens, it may as well have been destroyed. Yeah, man, and it's like, Zack trailed off for a moment. We've had the Zords for a while. We've fought alongside them, it's like they're a part of us, you know? And now they're gone. Billy said simply, leading to another brief silence amongst the teens. Without our Zords, there's nothing we can do against Rita's monsters if she grows them. Jason said slowly. They were our most powerful weapon, and unless we can get them back, we're at a serious disadvantage. A few more minutes of silence passed before Trini suddenly perked up. Hey, at least we still have Harry's magic. So things aren't totally bad, right? Zack was quick to pick up on her train of thought. Yeah, Harry totally kicked butt out there. He shrank Golder and Scorpina back to normal size like nothing. The other Rangers seemed to lighten up slightly at their enthusiasm, and Harry couldn't help the small smile that grew on his face too. I can't understand why Scorpina stayed in that scorpion monster form instead of changing back to human though, Billy said. Harry shot him a mischievous smile. That's because my spell didn't cancel Rita's, it just shrank their current size back to something closer to normal. Isn't that the same thing? Kimberly asked with confusion written on her face. Not exactly, Harry responded, sitting up straighter. Part of Rita's spell is what made Scorpina change, so I can only assume that since she didn't change back, both spells were in effect at once. Billy, his brain working faster than the others, seemed to get what Harry was hinting at if his growing smile was anything to go by, but the others still seemed confused. Finally, Jason was the one to ask. So what does that mean? Harry chuckled before he spoke. It means that if my spell lasts longer than Rita's, which it should since I put so much power into it, once Rita's wears off, Golder and Scorpina should end up somewhere in the vicinity of 6 inches tall until mine fades. The Power Rangers all shared a laugh at the image of a pint-sized Golder and Scorpina raging at their circumstances. Once they had calmed down, Harry voiced another question. Hey, where is my wand, by the way? The Rangers looked around in confusion before Alpha spoke up. I have it here. The robot walked up with Harry's wand in his hand, and the faint smell of char washed over the assembled humans. I took it from you when you were teleported here. It was smoldering slightly and I didn't want you to get burnt. Harry's eyes widened as he took the slightly blackened stick from Alpha. Smoldering? Alpha nodded his saucer-shaped head before turning back to the consoles and resuming his work. Yes. It wasn't quite on fire, but there was a trail of smoke and a few embers. I didn't want to take any chances. The Rangers had all gone still as Harry stared at his most recent focus, only now realizing that he no longer felt the faint tingle of magic as he held it. What? Trini started quietly before clearing her throat and speaking again. What does that mean? Harry slowly turned the wand over in his hands as he spoke. You remember when I told you guys that my wand was unstable because of how it was made? How the core components weren't meshing as well as I would have liked and that it could have consequences. The Rangers nodded, and it was Harry's turn to fail to speak this time. After all the work he had put into the wand, it was rather painful to see what had happened. He wouldn't have done anything different if placed in the situation again. Saving the Rangers was more than worth it, but it was still disheartening. What is it, Harry? Trini asked, kneeling down next to him and putting a hand on his arm. In response, Harry lifted his wand and gave it a sharp flick. It was a standard spellcasting movement, one that the Rangers had seen him use multiple times both in and out of battle, but this time was different. This time, the weakened wood of the burnt-out wand cracked and the top few inches broke free, flipping through the air before landing with a soft clatter, the burnt ashes that had once been the core of Harry's wand fluttering through the air in its wake. Harry idly examined the portion of the wand remaining in his hands, watching as more ashes poured from the exposed cavity within the wooden. There was silence in the command center for several moments before anyone spoke. Could you make another one? Jason asked, his voice already sounding defeated, as if he knew the answer before asking. Harry shook his head. Not in any acceptable amount of time. It would take at least a day just to carve out an appropriate wand. Besides that, I'd need more core components. Pretty much everything I had was destroyed in the magical storm that was created when I sealed this one up. And I doubt Rita will be sending many monsters I can harvest from as long as she has Tommy at her command. In the back of Harry's mind, he was slightly surprised at Jason's lack of outburst at his mentioning Tommy. But then he realized that if Zack had told Jason about his education on their rules against escalating battles, that he had probably also explained about their confirmed theory on the Green Ranger's identity. Then those thoughts were cast aside as his mind was once more overtaken by grief over the loss of his wand. He could fully sympathize with the Rangers over losing their Zords. It may not have been the best wand, being unbalanced and made from less than ideal materials, but Harry had put a lot of work into it. It was, just as Zack had said, like losing a part of himself. "Is there nothing that can be done?" Alpha asked, pleading apparent in his mechanical voice. Harry's silent shake of his head was the only answer offered. Finally, after several seconds of silence. "We're F," Zack deadpanned. Harry sighed. "Only slightly. We're F." "Yes, Zack, you've said that already. Multiple times. And that doesn't make it any less true." It had been mere minutes since Harry revealed that his wand was now useless, and it seemed as though the entirety of the Ranger's resolve had burnt up as readily as his wand. Jason stood as the sole voice of reason amongst the Rangers, with Alpha adding in a few comments every now and then while Harry stood stoically to one side. "That may be," Jason insisted, rising from where he had been leaning on one of the consoles as he spoke. "But we can't just give up." "Why shouldn't we?" Kimberly interjected, her face downtrodden as she stood up to their leader. "Zordon is gone. The Zords may as well be. Harry's wand is out of commission. There's nothing more we can do. But there's always a chance." Jason shot back, his voice unwavering in his determination. "As long as we are willing and able to fight, there's always a chance, and even the smallest chance is enough of a reason to continue fighting. The world needs us, Rangers." Zack shook his head in exasperation. "Just face it, Jason. The Green Ranger was Rita's trump card. She played it. She won. No Rangers. I cannot accept that. Zordon would not accept that." Alpha spoke firmly, but a clear hint of panic was detectable in his robotic voice. "But Zordon isn't here, Alpha," Billy said, turning from where he had been examining one of the consoles. "And no matter what we try, we can't seem to get a fix on his location." "And what about Tommy?" Jason near shouted into the silence that followed Billy's comment. "We have to find a way to break Rita's spell and save him. We have to keep fighting, if only to do that." There were several seconds of silence before Trini finally spoke up. "Harry, what do you think?" One by one, the other Rangers turned to face the silent wizard. Harry was leaning up against one of the walls behind the console, staring blankly at the ground, but he looked up when Trini spoke. Slowly, he met each of the Rangers' eyes, ending with Trini, before he spoke. "I know how you all feel. It's rather disturbing to me how close some of the parallels are between our situation now and the one I faced back at home during my own war." Harry pushed off the wall and moved to stand within the circle of consoles as the Rangers gathered in a group before him. "I told you I was involved in fighting against a group of terrorists, and that I was the one directly responsible for taking out their leader and ending the whole thing. What I didn't mention was the circumstances that led up to that victory." Harry sighed deeply, once more meeting each of their gazes as he spoke. They were dark times. The Order of the Phoenix, that's what we called ourselves, were left fighting against a force of sadistic murderers who wanted nothing more than to kill everyone that didn't follow their beliefs in an effort to take over the country and quite possibly the world after that, all under the banner of a glorified form of racism. We were underprepared, understaffed, and most of us were completely outmatched when it came to single combat against most of the members of Voldemort's forces. But there was one fact that kept us going despite all that. We knew that if we were to lose, if Voldemort and his Death Eaters were to take over, then all of those that we loved would be killed. All that we held dear would be perverted and destroyed. If we gave up, if we just decided one day that Voldemort had won and we couldn't do anything else to stop him, there would be nowhere in the world we could hide before he found us." Harry could see his rather morbid message was sinking in as the horror started to grow in the Rangers' eyes. It was clear that they hadn't considered this part of the battle. "You have fought valiantly since the day Zordon chose you to become the Power Rangers and have managed to stop Rita at every turn until she brought in her own Ranger. The situation now is definitely rather serious, but if you were to simply give up, it would hardly take you out of the fight. Rita would come down here with her armies, largely unopposed, and sweep through Angel Grove and the rest of the world from there. She would leave chaos and destruction in her wake, and anything and everything that any of us hold dear she would take personal pleasure in destroying completely." He let his head drop as he fought back a few dark memories from his own war before glancing back up at them again. "I know it's not really what you want to hear, but right now, you five are the only thing standing in the way of Rita and her conquest of Earth. Zordon chose you all for a reason. Jason is right, even the slightest chance of victory is enough of a reason to continue fighting. Especially when you are fighting for all of your friends and family who would otherwise be defenseless against evil. The 5 rangers stood silent for several moments, their eyes glazed over slightly as they thought about what Harry had said. Finally, Kimberly shook her head. I never really thought about it like that. The other 4 mumbled their agreement as Harry spoke again. I know that's not really the kind of message you guys were hoping for, but we really have no other choice right now. We have to do whatever we can to combat the darkness, because without us, where would the world be? The command center once more descended into silence, even Alpha keeping quiet as the rangers contemplated. Harry once more broke the silence as he stepped forward, holding his hand out palm down before him. What do you say, guys? For our family and friends, for all those innocents who would suffer if Rita were to take over, for everyone in Angel Grove and the world, we have to fight. Are you with me? Harry wasn't at all surprised when Jason was the first to step forward and place his hand over Harry's. His eyes were radiating his gratitude as he walked up, though Harry couldn't help but wonder how long it would last this time before Jason started sniping at him again. Trini soon followed Jason and joined them with a soft small smile on her face and with Kimberly right on her tail. You're right, Harry, the Pink Ranger said slowly. I really don't like the situation as you painted it for us, but you're right. We have to keep fighting. Billy was next to step forward and place his hand on the growing stack. Your conclusion is logical, Harry. I'm just sorry I didn't see it before. With only Zack left standing outside their huddle, all eyes turned to him. You know, the Black Ranger said somewhat grumpily. If Zordon had explained that stuff to us from the beginning, I doubt any of us would have accepted the power. Harry rolled his eyes. Destiny is rarely apparent to everyone from the get-go, Zack. Do you think I wanted to be tossed into the middle of a war against a dark wizard who was supposed to have died a decade before when I first started going to Hogwarts at age 11? Harry was cut off by a shocked outcry from the Rangers at his revelation, but he merely waved his free hand airily. I'll explain another time. But the point, Zack, is that I spent my first several years at Hogwarts trying to be nothing more than just Harry. The only problem with that is that I was dragged right back into the heart of things no matter what I did. Fact is, nobody chooses to get involved in these things. Or at least nobody who can still be considered sane. But with how things are now, you are involved. All of us are, and if we don't fight, who will? Zack only took another few seconds before he walked up and joined the group, placing his hand on top. I suppose Zordon couldn't really give us all the doom and gloom stuff from the start, or we would have run like crazy. You're right, Harry. We have to do this for everyone. Harry smiled at the teen. And that, Zack, is why you were chosen to be a Power Ranger. Why all of you were chosen by Destiny and by Zordon to fight against Rita. Anyone can be pulled into a fight like this, but it takes a special kind of person to stand strong throughout it and fight on despite the odds. The slightly emotional group was interrupted by a sudden loud beeping coming from several of the computer banks around them. What's going on, Alpha? Jason demanded as the group broke up. The question was answered on its own as the twin pillars on either side of Zordon's tube lit up with electricity. Mere moments later, twin arcs jumped from each pillar and into the tube, forming into the outline of a familiar face. As the electrical energy faded, Zordon was revealed once more visible in the tube. The computer's auto-search subroutine finally located Zordon. Alpha announced unnecessarily as the Rangers' faces all lit up at the sight of their mentor. Zordon. The Rangers all shouted in elation only for their faces to fall moments later when there was no response from the trapped wizard. Upon closer inspection, Harry noticed that Zordon's eyes were closed and his face was tilted down slightly, as if sleeping. Mirroring his thoughts, Kimberly spoke up. Is he asleep? Or can he even hear us? Alpha wobbled up to one of the computers and began pressing buttons again. I sincerely doubt it. As he is caught in a time warp, Zordon has not slept in over 10,000 years and the computer indicates that all communication lines have been successfully established with Zordon. I just don't understand it. It's like he just isn't there. Zack slumped slightly and voiced what was on all of their minds. Damn it, and just when I thought we were getting a break too. Can you think of anything that would make Zordon act this way? Trini asked Alpha, moving up to his side and watching as he continued to press seemingly random buttons on the console before him. Do you think Rita could have attacked him somehow? Kimberly spoke next, fear once more in her voice. No, Alpha responded instantly. That's impossible. When she trapped Zordon in the time warp, it was intended to be for all eternity. It was only through incredible luck and Zordon's help from his end that I was able to establish a connection with him after he was first trapped. Rita had to make the prison incredibly strong to ensure he couldn't escape without a phenomenal amount of power, far more than Zordon or Rita could ever expect to have alone. If she had left a way to attack Zordon within his prison, then he would have been able to use that opening to break out centuries ago. Take a look at this. Billy called from another console as he examined a printout he had just retrieved. It's a diagnosis of Zordon's biosignature and bioelectrical readings. Jason took the offered paper from the Blue Ranger and glanced at it for a moment before blinking and leaning closer. Harry took a peek at it from over Jason's shoulder and couldn't help but understand his reaction. The print on the paper was incredibly small and what little he could make out made absolutely no sense to him. Kimberly, after taking a glance at the paper herself, turned back to Billy. Billy, not all of us have genius-level IQs. Could you please explain to us what this means? Preferably in the Queen's English if at all possible? Harry quickly said, feeling a slight headache just from his short glance at what was probably an incredibly complex technical readout. Billy blinked before smiling sheepishly. Sorry about that. It says that Zordon's physical health is as impeccable as always, which makes sense as he is effectively frozen as he was when he was first trapped, but his brainwave activity has diverged from the norm. Alpha moved over to Jason and examined the paper in his grasp. Yes, it does appear as though his mental activity levels have decreased approximately 27% from normal, almost as if the robot perked up slightly before turning quickly and moving faster than Harry had ever seen him move back to the central computer station where he started pressing buttons again. So what? Zack offered slowly. His lights are on, but nobody is home. The Rangers and Harry exchanged confused glances until Alpha interrupted them with an uncharacteristic shout. Yes. He is. Zordon is in meditation. He must be communing with the morphing grid. He's doing what with the what now? Zack asked, even Billy showing a hint of confusion for once. Alpha turned back to face them, happiness evident in his voice. According to the readings and after comparing them to past readings, I can confidently conclude that Zordon is currently attempting to speak with the consciousness at the heart of the morphing grid that is the source of the morphing powers. He must be trying to get some kind of help for the battle against Rita and her Green Ranger. So Zordon is trying to find something to help us? Trini asked quietly, confidence growing in her eyes once more. Most likely, yes. Alpha nodded happily. He does this every so often, seeking advice from the grid before making any large decision about the power. The last time he did so was shortly before requesting I teleport the 5 of you to the command center to become the Power Rangers. Based on these readings, he has been in his meditative state since shortly after the last time we got a partial line of communication with him. That would explain why we haven't been able to establish another link since then. He was too busy to aid the connection himself. When Alpha trailed off, the humans in the room waited eagerly as the robot continued working the controls before him. After a minute or so, Jason finally spoke up. Can you tell us anything else? Are there any chances of him waking up anytime soon? We could really use a bit of advice about now. When the Rangers and Harry all voiced varying levels of agreement, Alpha finally spoke again, although hesitantly. I'm not sure, Jason. I am searching the computer records for any past instance of a communion with the morphing grid having taken this long, but I have been so far unsuccessful. It is possible that Zordon is having difficulties on his end, but rather doubtful since his situation hasn't changed in the time he has been trapped beyond losing connection with the command center. Is he in some kind of trouble, Alpha? Kimberly asked in concern, glancing worriedly up at Zordon's still face. I really don't know, Kimberly. Alpha responded, much to the Ranger's disappointment, I have no way of finding that out from this end. Zordon always kept the majority of the details of his communications with the morphing grid private beyond explaining the final decisions and conclusions made. I suppose it is possible he is having some kind of difficulty, but there is no way to know for sure. Harry and the Rangers were silent once more. Each of them mulling over the thought that they had Zordon back, but at the same time didn't. It was frustrating in the extreme for them all in light of recent events. Hey! Kimberly suddenly shouted, making everyone jump slightly. Sorry, but I just had an idea. Since Zordon is doing his magic thing and we can't contact him while he is, why don't we send our resident magic guy after him? All eyes turned to Harry, who felt his eyes widen slightly. I don't know that would work very well, Kimberly. Why not? She all but demanded, frowning at him. Well, for one thing, I use a different brand of magic. I don't really know that I would be able to do what he's doing. Billy hummed for a moment before speaking. While your caution has merit, the fact that Rita was able to use small amounts of your particular brand of magic in her spells, even if unintentionally, indicates that it may be irrelevant. Harry ran Billy's words through his mind a few times to figure out what he was saying before continuing. And secondly, I have no real idea how to do what he's done, much less find Zordon once I'm wherever I would need to be. Alpha was the one who popped his balloon this time, drawing everyone's attention as he spoke. From what I understand of the process, Zordon puts himself into a meditative state and follows his personal connection to the morphing grid to the heart of the power. He described it once like a trail of energy he has to follow. If I calibrate the sensors correctly, I should be able to detect any such energy trail to more closely pinpoint Zordon's interdimensional location. With a few sensors linking you to the computer, I would be able to use it to guide you to Zordon's presence. From there, you should be able to locate and follow the same trail Zordon did, since you have already demonstrated an ability to sense when morphing grid energy is used to cast spells. Harry could feel the Ranger's excitement and hope growing even as his own protests were defeated. He really didn't like this idea, especially as it seemed like a very desperate move to him. In his experience, desperate moves were performed with little planning or preparation and ended rather poorly more often than not. All the same, he couldn't think of any other reason to object, and in the current situation, desperate moves were probably the only option they had. With a great sigh and a certain feeling of foreboding, Harry nodded his head. "All right, if you think that this will work, Alpha, then I suppose I'll give it a shot." Harry's feeling of dread only got deeper as the Rangers began cheering, probably happy just to have some kind of a plan. Alpha had only needed a few minutes to modify the computer's sensors and locate the trail of morphing grid energy that Zordon had followed. So it was that a mere 10 minutes later saw Harry once more lying on a cot in the center of the circle of consoles. The biggest difference this time were numerous wires and such attached to his head and then connected to one of the nearby computers. "Now remember, Harry," Alpha instructed from nearby. "Once you have placed yourself in a meditative state, the computer will guide your mental projection to Zordon's physical presence. Once there, you should be able to locate the energy trail and follow it right to Zordon." Harry nodded before letting out a sigh. "I would just like to go on record, once again, by saying that I'm not entirely comfortable with this." Jason frowned at him from his spot next to Zach several feet away. "Then why did you agree to do it?" "Because I can't support speeches like the one I made earlier if I'm not willing to back up my own beliefs when it comes down to it. This is an absolutely crazy plan, but it's the only one we have. We need Zordon's help if there is any chance of beating out Rita and breaking her spell on Tommy." Kimberly and Trini walked up next to the cot and looked down at him, both looking concerned. Kimberly spoke first. "If you really aren't comfortable with this, then you don't have to do it, Harry. We'll find some other way. Heck, maybe we could even just wait for Zordon to come out of his trance himself. It might not even be too long before he does." Harry smiled at Kimberly and her attempt to give him an out, even though this had originally been her idea that everyone else just ran with. "It's fine, Kimberly. This really is the only choice we have, and I really am the only one who can do it. I'll be fine." Kimberly nodded, though Harry thought he caught sight of tears in her eyes before she turned away. Trini just kneeled down next to the cot and put a hand on his arm, squeezing lightly. "Promise you'll come back?" Harry grinned as reassuringly as possible. "I promise I'll do my very best." Trini just stared at him for a moment before lunging forward and hugging him as best she could while he was lying on the cot. He had been told not to move too much or else risk displacing some of the electrodes on his face, so couldn't hug her back properly, but he did the best he could. A few moments later, Trini leaned back with a blush bright enough to light the room. "You owed me a hug for saving you earlier." Harry smiled slightly, his mind spinning and fighting down his own blush as best he could. "Right, of course." Trini gave him one final nod and stood abruptly before speed walking to stand next to Kimberly. The Pink Ranger was clearly fighting down a smile on her face as she shot random glances at her friend who was resolutely studying her shoes. Harry glanced in the other direction to find Zach and Jason fighting down snickers of their own. He lifted one eyebrow as he continued to stare at them until Zach finally noticed and straightened himself up, casually elbowing Jason and nodding toward the wizard so the Red Ranger would sober himself as well. Giving the two a brief nod, Harry glanced to where Alpha and Billy were working the computers. The plan was for at least one of them to remain at the station, monitoring his progress as best they could in the hopes of averting any life-ending consequences. That was the plan anyway. In all truth, despite the example of Rita, Harry really wasn't sure that his magic wouldn't react poorly to the process. In his experience, and he had relayed this to the others, his type of magic had this crazy habit of shorting out electronics every time they met. This point had even been proven when Billy had had to go through so many prototypes before finding a communicator that wouldn't die as soon as he tried to use it. Alpha, however, insisted that the computers in the command center were heavily shielded from that type of energy overload, so there would be nothing to worry about now that they were fully repaired again. Harry was hardly convinced, but he knew there wasn't really another choice. "Are you ready, Harry?" Alpha asked, waddling over with a handheld device of some kind that he waved over Harry's body before pressing a few buttons and repeating the gesture. "Ready as I'll ever be," was Harry's tired-sounding reply. "All right," Alpha nodded before moving back to his station. "The computers are ready. Go ahead and go into your meditative state and I will begin the process." Harry gave a slight nod, once more to avoid shifting the sensors. Wish me luck. With a great exhalation, Harry forced his body to relax and let himself fade into the meditative trance he used to work on his occlumency shields. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 5. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and 10-star 12 on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.